The overthinking paralysis loop. The mind, especially a sharp and intelligent one, often carries a double-edged sword. The very ability to analyze, to perceive nuances, and to foresee countless possibilities can become a prison. This is the paradox of intelligence. The smarter you are, the more you see. Every angle, every possible outcome, every hidden variable, every ripple effect. But with this heightened perception comes a heavy burden. The burden of indecision. Imagine standing at a crossroads, not just one intersection, but a complex web of paths stretching endlessly before you. Each path represents a choice, a decision to be made, and your mind races to evaluate every potential route. At first, this seems like a blessing. After all, who wouldn't want to consider every factor to make the best possible decision? But soon, the process turns toxic. What-ifs creep in like shadows, multiplying with every new thought. What if I take this path and regret it later? What if the other option was better? What if something I haven't even thought of yet could ruin everything? This is the overthinking paralysis loop, a relentless cycle where rational caution morphs into a graveyard of missed opportunities. Every potential pitfall you identify becomes another nail in the coffin of action. And the more intelligent and thoughtful you are, the deeper and wider this graveyard grows. Your mind digs these graves with endless what-ifs, hiding them beneath the guise of careful reasoning. To understand this better, picture a chess player confronted with a critical move. The expert player doesn't just think one step ahead, but many moves into the future. They visualize complex sequences, calculating countless variations, weighing risks and rewards. This is strategic genius. But now imagine the same player overwhelmed by the sheer number of possibilities, unable to commit to any move because every choice has an intricate web of consequences. They sit frozen, the clock ticking down, not because of lack of knowledge, but because their brilliance traps them in a maze of doubt. Or consider the entrepreneur launching a startup. At every turn, they must choose the product direction, the market strategy, the team members to hire. An intelligent entrepreneur knows the stakes and wants to make the perfect choice, so they endlessly research, analyze, and second-guess. But instead of moving forward, they get stuck, revisiting decisions ad infinitum, fearing that any wrong step could be fatal. What if the market changes? What if a competitor sneaks ahead? What if the team isn't ready? Each thought breeds more caution until the window of opportunity closes. The irony is profound. Intelligence, which should empower us to navigate the world with clarity, often becomes the source of our deepest indecision. Because to be smart is to understand complexity, and complexity breeds uncertainty. The more factors you perceive, the harder it becomes to feel certain enough to act. This paralysis is not just about hesitation. It's about a mental feedback loop where every thought breeds another worry, and every worry demands more analysis. The mind tries to rationalize by seeking more information, more perspectives, more reasons to justify each possible choice. But in doing so, it sows confusion and exhaustion. Overthinking consumes energy, erodes confidence, and ultimately sabotages action itself. An example of this in everyday life might be choosing a career path. Someone highly intelligent may see the merits and drawbacks of dozens of careers, envisioning not just immediate job satisfaction, but long-term growth, financial stability, social impact, and personal happiness. They may consider how economic trends, family expectations, and even global issues affect these choices. Each factor expands the list of considerations until the weight becomes unbearable. They find themselves stuck, unable to commit, perpetually wondering if another choice might be better. Even in relationships, the overthinking paralysis loop can wreak havoc. Imagine an individual analyzing every word, gesture, and interaction, dissecting what was said, what was left unsaid, and what it might mean for the future. They anticipate conflicts before they happen, wonder if they are truly compatible, and ruminate over countless scenarios. Instead of allowing relationships to unfold naturally, they trap themselves in a maze of doubt, questioning every step and stalling intimacy. So, how do we escape this loop? First, we must recognize that overthinking is a natural byproduct of intelligence, but it is not a virtue in itself. Awareness is the key. Once you see the pattern, you can intervene. Second, accept that perfect decisions rarely exist. Life is inherently uncertain, and every choice carries risk. The smartest people don't avoid risk altogether. They learn to tolerate it, to move forward despite uncertainty. Third, cultivate decisiveness as a skill separate from intelligence. Decisiveness means choosing to act with the best information you have, even if incomplete, and committing to that choice with confidence. Fourth, set boundaries on your decision-making process. Limit the time you spend analyzing options. Recognize when more information stops adding value and starts creating noise. Fifth, practice mindfulness and emotional regulation. Overthinking often feeds off anxiety and fear. When you learn to calm your mind, you reduce the fuel that feeds the paralysis. Finally, embrace the reality that some mistakes are inevitable, and that's okay. Mistakes are not graves, but stepping stones, lessons that deepen wisdom. The overthinking paralysis loop reminds us that intelligence alone is not enough. Action requires courage, decisiveness, and acceptance of imperfection. Smarter minds see more angles, yes, but the bravest minds choose a path. Even when the map is incomplete, your thoughts are powerful tools. Don't let them become chains. Dig not graves for your possibilities, but bridges to your future. In this infinite dance between knowledge and action, the greatest mastery is to know when to stop thinking and start living. Because in the end, a choice not made is an opportunity lost, buried under endless what-ifs and silent regrets. The self-questioning spiral. Of all the traps the human mind sets for itself, the self-questioning spiral is among the most cunning because it dresses up as intelligence. It's the voice that says, "Should you trust this conclusion? Are you sure you're being objective? What if you're just fooling yourself again?" This isn't skepticism, which can be healthy and clear-eyed. This is a recursive loop, an Ouroboros of thought, where the act of questioning turns upon itself over and over, until the very ground of your own judgment erodes beneath your feet. At first, it feels like a pursuit of wisdom, but soon you find that all you're doing is circling, digging, and unraveling, with no bottom and no end. Imagine a young artist, passionate about their craft. At first, their questions are constructive. Is this the best color for this piece? Is this composition strong? But one day, the questions multiply. What if my entire approach is wrong? What if I don't even know what good art is? Can I trust my own instincts? As days turn to weeks, the artist's brush freezes midair. The more they try to think their way out, the deeper the spiral wins, each doubt birthing two more, each answer leading only to new uncertainty. The self-questioning, once a tool for improvement, has become a maze without exits. This spiral is particularly vicious for those who pride themselves on self-awareness or critical thinking. We're told that wise people question themselves, that only fools are certain. And that's true, up to a point. But what happens when the questioning never stops? What happens when every self-examination spawns another doubt about your own ability to examine? Eventually, the act of questioning becomes its own reflex, like a muscle twitch, no longer tied to growth, but only to the need to find something wrong. You begin to question your intentions, your competence, your motives, and then your very capacity to question it all. Let's take another example. Consider someone in a relationship, genuinely wanting to do right by their partner. One disagreement arises and they ask themselves, "Did I handle that correctly?" A healthy question. But soon it multiplies. Am I even a good communicator? Am I too insecure to trust my own feelings? Maybe my own logic is flawed. The original issue becomes irrelevant. Instead, you're interrogating the structure of your own mind, finding faults not just in what you said, but in the way you even process reality. Each layer of questioning pulls you further from resolution, further from confidence, until all you see are cracks in every foundation you once trusted. The spiral feels intelligent because it wears the mask of insight. You think you're being diligent, thorough, even virtuous. You believe you're getting closer to truth, but in reality, the spiral devours certainty, devours clarity, until you no longer believe in your ability to trust anything, not even your own skepticism. This is why the spiral is so exhausting. You're fighting shadows of your own creation, never defeating any, because each victory just splits the shadow into more fragments to fight. This isn't just philosophical either. It seeps into every corner of life. You write a message to a friend, then pause. Was that too direct? Too vague? Should I have waited? You recall a memory and then ask, did it really happen the way I think? Or am I just reconstructing a story that feels plausible? Even your own emotions become suspect. You feel anger, and then wonder, is this justified, or am I being petty? Then you question whether you're even qualified to assess your own motives, and the spiral begins anew. Sometimes, the spiral is triggered by failure, a setback that shakes your trust in yourself. Other times, it's success that brings it on. The stakes feel higher, so every decision is scrutinized. You're afraid that one missed detail will expose you as a fraud, so you double-check, triple-check, until checking becomes compulsive, and nothing feels settled. Perfectionists are especially vulnerable here, but so are those who simply care too much about being right. It's a mental quicksand. The harder you struggle for perfect certainty, the deeper you sink into uncertainty. In academia, this loop is infamous. The student who once loved learning finds themselves unable to write even a simple sentence without asking, is this the right way to express it? Is my logic airtight? What if I miss some critical perspective? Thesis drafts balloon with footnotes, every claim hedged and caveated, until the original voice is drowned out by the anxiety of getting it wrong. In the name of intellectual honesty, the student becomes paralyzed, unable to assert anything for fear of invisible errors lurking just outside their awareness. But the spiral isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet and relentless, like a low-grade fever of doubt. You try to meditate, but then wonder if you're meditating correctly. You seek advice, but then question whether you're even capable of acting on it, or whether the act of asking has revealed a deeper flaw. Eventually, you reach a point where questioning feels safer than choosing. Doubt, at least, can't be proven wrong. Action, on the other hand, means risking the possibility that you really are as mistaken as you fear. So, why do our minds do this? In evolutionary terms, a little self-doubt is adaptive. It keeps us from overreaching, from repeating mistakes, from ignoring warning signs. But the spiral hijacks this ancient safety feature and turns it into a feedback loop with no off switch. Each time you question, your mind rewards you with a small feeling of safety. Maybe now I'll avoid disaster. But in reality, you're only feeding the anxiety, training your brain that nothing is ever truly safe to commit to, that every certainty hides a deeper uncertainty waiting to be uncovered. This isn't just a mental quirk, it shapes destinies. People stuck in the self-questioning spiral hesitate to commit to relationships, careers, decisions both big and small. Opportunities pass by, not because they aren't seen, but because each possibility is scrutinized into oblivion. The spiral disguises itself as humility, but its real effect is to shrink your world down to a single, anxious point of indecision. Breaking free isn't about just being confident or silencing doubt altogether. That's not realistic, and not even desirable. Instead, the exit from the spiral starts with recognizing it for what it is. Not a mark of superior wisdom, but a trick of the mind that confuses vigilance with paralysis. You have to allow some questions to remain unanswered, to accept that not every thought needs to be second-guessed, that imperfect action beats endless rumination. One practical approach is to set boundaries around your questioning. Give yourself permission to ask why up to a certain point, and then consciously choose to move forward, even if your answers feel incomplete. Trust isn't about having all the evidence. It's about choosing to act in the presence of uncertainty. When you feel the spiral pulling you down, pause and remind yourself, not every question is a doorway to truth. Some are just echoes in an empty room. And most of all, remember, it's possible to be both reflective and decisive, both humble and grounded. True insight comes not from devouring your own confidence in an endless loop, but from building it carefully, and brick by brick, knowing that some gaps will always remain. The self-questioning spiral promises wisdom, but delivers only exhaustion. The real courage is learning to question wisely, then step out of the spiral and live, even when you don't have all the answers. The feedback intelligence paradox. Have you ever caught yourself so absorbed in self-improvement that the very process becomes its own trap? There's a strange paradox lurking in the world of feedback, a hidden loop that devours clarity, not by lack of intelligence, but by a relentless over-application of it. Let's step inside the mind of someone caught in the feedback intelligence paradox, a state where the urge to analyze feedback mutates from a tool of growth into a mirror maze of recursive self-doubt. Imagine you're a musician. You record yourself playing, then listen back, searching for flaws. You catch a sour note, a missed rhythm, So, you practice and the next take improves. But then you listen again, not just to the notes, but to your own reactions. Did you cringe at the right moments? Did you even notice the subtle crescendo? Now, you're no longer just practicing music. You're scrutinizing your own ability to notice mistakes, to interpret criticism, to absorb praise. The original craft, the act of playing music, has faded, overtaken by the metacraft of perfecting your self-analysis. The feedback that once fueled your growth now demands constant surveillance. The task itself is lost, submerged beneath waves of recursive self-monitoring. This is how the feedback intelligence paradox quietly takes root. It doesn't arrive with sirens. It grows in the soil of good intentions. At first, feedback is a teacher. It opens new paths, exposes blind spots, lights up the terrain you couldn't see alone. But if you're especially thoughtful, if you want not just to improve, but to maximize every drop of learning, then a strange pressure appears, the urge to optimize feedback itself. Was that advice truly helpful, or was it biased? Did you misunderstand the criticism, or overestimate the praise? Did your response reveal openness or defensiveness? You start giving feedback to your own feedback loop. You analyze how you analyze. And in this hall of mirrors, every reflection breeds another. Suddenly progress slows. Where you once acted on simple cues, try harder, adjust, repeat, you now hesitate, second-guess, rewrite your reactions. It's no longer, how can I get better at this? But, how can I get better at getting better? The recursive spiral spins tighter, each layer of analysis adding friction, anxiety, and ambiguity. Picture a student after an exam. She receives her results, a mix of high and low scores. At first, the solution seems simple. Review mistakes, focus on weak spots, seek help. But what if she's been told repeatedly that her greatest asset is her ability to learn from feedback? Now, every correction becomes a test of her intelligence. If she misses a nuance in the feedback, is she failing at self-improvement itself? She rereads teacher comments, replays every word in her mind, wonders if her emotional response to criticism was too defensive. She seeks feedback on how she handled feedback. The learning process transforms from a straight path into an anxious loop. The focus drifts away from the math problem, the essay, the subject, drifting instead toward her own ability to process, respond, and self-optimize. This recursive loop doesn't just appear in school. Think of the workplace. Performance reviews begin as opportunities for growth, but soon become occasions for hyper-self-scrutiny. An employee gets feedback about communication, perhaps a minor note about being clearer in emails. The next week, every draft is over-edited, every sentence interrogated, not just for clarity, but for the perception of clarity. Then comes the doubt. Was I too robotic in my response? Too eager? Did my improvement look authentic or rehearsed? Should I ask for more feedback about how I handled the previous feedback? Instead of deepening their craft or improving output, the employee becomes tangled in a second-order loop, managing impressions about how they manage impressions. At the heart of the feedback intelligence paradox is a misunderstanding of the role of feedback itself. Feedback, in its healthiest form, is meant to be a guide, a set of outside signals that help you recalibrate. It's not meant to become the focus of your entire awareness. The paradox emerges when feedback stops being an aid to the task and becomes a task unto itself. A never-ending performance where you're not just fixing the original flaw, but also critiquing the very way you fix, reflect, and react. This paradox grows sharper in our hyper-connected, achievement-obsessed culture. Social media thrives on instant feedback, likes, comments, shares. Creators obsess over analytics, but soon, the numbers matter less than the stories built around them. Was that dip in engagement a sign the content was off? Or is it an algorithmic glitch? Should I pivot my style based on a few negative comments, or stay true to my voice? Each layer of feedback breeds more questions, more meta-analysis, until the creative act is buried beneath a mountain of strategic second-guessing. The line between creation and response blurs, and what was once a flow of inspiration becomes a stutter of overthought adjustments. Even in relationships, this paradox creeps in. A friend offers a gentle suggestion. Maybe you talk too much about work or seem distracted. At first, you thank them. Try to be more present. But soon, you're watching yourself in every conversation, wondering, am I reacting the right way to this feedback? Do I seem too eager to change? Too resistant? Should I ask if my response was appropriate? Each interaction is shadowed by meta-awareness, a third eye watching not just the relationship, but the management of the relationship. Authenticity is replaced by recursive self-correction. This feedback spiral is especially vicious for those with high self-awareness and a strong drive to improve. Intelligence, in this sense, becomes both a gift and a curse. The smarter you are, the more angles you see, until you lose sight of the original intention. Every error becomes an error about errors. Every correction opens up a new domain to optimize. So, how do you escape this recursive vortex? The answer is subtle and perhaps a little uncomfortable. It begins with recognizing that growth is not infinitely improvable by thinking about the process of improvement itself. At a certain point, you must trust your instincts and return to the simple, original task. Practice the music, write the essay, have the conversation. Let feedback be a tool, not the arena. Allow yourself to be imperfect in your own self-correction. Progress doesn't happen in the echo chamber of meta-analysis. It happens in the mess of doing, failing, and trying again. Sometimes with blind spots, sometimes missing the deeper lesson, but always moving forward, not circling around. The greatest wisdom often comes not from perfecting the feedback loop, but from stepping outside it, rediscovering the unself-conscious joy of losing yourself in the task, trusting that growth will follow, imperfect and real. If you find yourself caught in the feedback intelligence paradox, ask not just how you can improve, but how you can live again in the raw, present moment. Not every flaw must be fixed through a hall of mirrors. Sometimes, the most intelligent act is to put the mirror down and simply play, create, or connect, as if no one, including yourself, is watching. That's where real clarity and real progress waits. The meta-awareness trap. Imagine for a moment that you're sitting in a quiet room, just breathing. At first, there's nothing unusual about it, until a strange awareness creeps in. You notice that you are breathing. That awareness might spark another. You realize you're noticing your own breathing, tracking each inhale and exhale with your mind's eye, dissecting something that once happened without effort. In that split second, the very act of noticing transforms from a background process into the foreground, turning the most basic thing, breathing, into an object of scrutiny. For some, this spiral of awareness is a passing moment. But for others, it becomes a persistent phenomenon. It's the meta-awareness trap, where you don't just live your life, but constantly monitor yourself living it, layer upon layer, until action becomes entangled in endless observation. The meta-awareness trap is both a modern curse and a secret inheritance of human consciousness. It begins innocently enough, with a simple act of self-reflection. Maybe after a mistake, or when you try to improve at something important, you become aware of your thoughts. I am nervous before this presentation, but then a second-order awareness appears. I'm noticing that I am nervous. At first, this seems like growth. You're stepping back from your mind, gaining perspective. But the paradox is that every step you take back can produce another observer. Like standing between two mirrors, your own reflection echoing into infinity. I'm noticing that I'm nervous. The mind doubles back, commenting on itself, analyzing its own analysis. Suddenly, you're no longer simply present. You're an observer of the observer, lost in an internal commentary that is louder than the event itself. What does this look like in real life? Imagine a musician playing on stage. In the early days, the notes flow effortlessly, but as their career progresses, self-awareness grows. Audiences, critics, recordings, reputation, they begin to watch themselves play, then become aware that they are watching themselves, wondering, do I look authentic? Do I seem nervous? The pure, unfiltered experience of music is interrupted by an internal director giving commentary. You just stumbled on that note. Now you're overthinking. Now you're aware that you're overthinking. Snap out of it. Each new layer of awareness becomes a new knot, making it harder to perform, harder to trust muscle memory, harder to be free. This is the meta-awareness trap. You're not just living, you're supervising yourself living, then supervising the supervisor, ad infinitum. You see this not just on stage, but in relationships, in work, in creativity. Think about trying to say something vulnerable to someone you care about. The first wave is the raw feeling. Then comes the awareness. I'm feeling nervous. Then comes the self-analysis. I'm aware that I'm nervous. Will they notice? What does it mean that I'm so self-conscious? Suddenly you're rehearsing, managing, curating, not just what you say, but how you appear to be saying it. Your emotional energy is spent not on the conversation, but on the endless regulation of your own internal state. It's like running two operating systems at once, one just to watch the other. There's a reason why this trap is so common in modern life. We live in a world of constant self-presentation, social media, video calls, performance reviews, personal branding. There are always eyes, even if they're just imagined. We become our own audience, our own critic, our own stage manager. And with every layer of self-awareness, we add distance between ourselves and our actions. Instead of being in the zone, we are outside the zone, analyzing the zone, wondering why we can't get in. The result? Paralysis, doubt, an inability to lose yourself in anything. Take the simple act of walking into a room. Before the age of self-consciousness, you just entered, unaware. As awareness rises, you wonder, how do I look? How do I move? Am I too stiff? Now I'm noticing my own stiffness. Am I overthinking? Soon you're analyzing your own self-analysis, spiraling into a paralysis where even putting one foot in front of the other feels awkward and artificial. The body tenses up, the mind races, and presence is lost in a hall of mirrors. Why is this trap so hard to escape? Partly, it's because meta-awareness is often celebrated. The world tells us that insight, self-reflection, and mindfulness are virtues. And they are, to a point. Meta-awareness lets you learn from mistakes, adjust behaviors, grow emotionally. But past a certain threshold, it flips into obsession. It's like a knife that sharpens itself so many times, it's no longer a tool, but a danger to its own edge. Real freedom, the kind that underpins creativity, spontaneity, and genuine connection, requires a certain forgetfulness. Athletes call it flow. Artists call it being in the moment. You act without commentary. You live without noticing that you're living. In these rare states, meta-awareness fades into the background, and you merge with your action. But when meta-awareness takes over, you are never quite where you are. Every act is observed, commented on, and doubted. Let's take another example. Public speaking. Almost everyone dreads it, but some transcend that fear. What's the difference? Often it's not skill, but how many layers of self-monitoring are operating. The natural speaker is present, aware of the audience, but not obsessed with their own awareness. The anxious speaker, by contrast, is caught in the meta-awareness trap. How am I standing? Do I sound nervous? Now I notice that I'm asking if I sound nervous. Can they see that I'm thinking this? Now I'm thinking about whether they can see that I'm thinking. Each layer of observation becomes a new source of anxiety. The speech becomes a performance of managing internal states, rather than communicating ideas. This is why so many people say their best speeches happen when they forget themselves. The trap dissolves, and presence returns. But how do you escape the meta-awareness trap when you notice it? Here's the catch. You can't escape by noticing more. That's just another layer. The paradox is that every effort to stop being so self-aware makes you more self-aware. Trying to act naturally is, itself, unnatural. The only path out is to let go, not by force, but by gently returning your attention to what matters outside yourself. Sometimes, it's as simple as focusing fully on another person, or on the task, or on the music, letting the commentary slip into the background. It's the difference between looking at yourself in a mirror versus looking out the window at the world. When your gaze is outward, the inner observer grows quiet. In a way, the meta-awareness trap is the price we pay for consciousness itself. It's the double-edged gift of being able to know ourselves. Without it, we would be less anxious, but also less capable of growth and empathy. The challenge is not to banish meta-awareness entirely, but to learn how to dance with it, using it when it serves, and gently letting it go when it becomes a cage. The next time you catch yourself spiraling into endless self-observation, remember, you are not just the watcher, you are also the one who acts, who feels, who lives. Your life is not meant to be a never-ending commentary track. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is simply be, trusting that the moment does not require your supervision. If you ever find yourself trapped in a loop of watching yourself live, remember the freedom of your childhood. The way you ran or danced or spoke without self-consciousness. That freedom is not lost. It's simply hidden behind layers of mirrors. When you turn your attention outward toward a friend, a challenge, a cause, or even just the feeling of wind on your skin, you can step out of the infinite regress of self-observation. The world is waiting for you to join it, not just as a commentator, but as a participant. You will never stop being aware, but you can learn to let that awareness serve you rather than rule you. And in those moments when you forget to watch yourself, when you are simply living, you may find the kind of freedom that meta-awareness can never provide. That's the paradox and the gift of the meta-awareness trap. It's the knowledge that, while you can never stop being aware, you can choose not to be trapped by your own observation. In the end, presence is not the absence of awareness, but the ability to let awareness fade into the background, so that life, in all its messy beauty, can come rushing back to the foreground. The prediction erosion effect. Imagine standing at the edge of a forest, map in hand, certain of every turn before you. The wind shifts, branches creak, and you take your first step. But with each footfall, the map, once so clear, begins to blur, as if your knowledge of the trail is not just lighting your path, but erasing it too. This is the strange, almost paradoxical territory of the prediction erosion effect, a phenomenon where your ability to foresee the future becomes so precise, so obsessive, that it doesn't just reveal what's to come, it quietly unravels the very future you hope to capture. And in the process, the act of predicting becomes an act of rewriting, of self-defeating prophecy. Why does this happen? Let's slow down and truly inhabit the psychological terrain. At first, the desire to predict is natural, even necessary. In uncertain worlds, financial markets, relationships, weather, health, even our own inner lives, prediction feels like a shield against chaos. We crave patterns, explanations, forecasts. We build models. We become so skilled at projecting forward that we start to live in a reality shaped not by what is, but by what we think will be. Each time you anticipate a friend's reaction, preempt a boss's criticism, or strategize your next move in life, you're not just responding to reality, you're sculpting it, moment by moment, with your own predictions. But here's where the effect grows stranger and far more subtle. If you become too good at predicting, if your anticipation grows so sharp that every move seems calculated, every twist foreseen, you start to rewrite the script of your own future. Like a novelist who knows the ending so well that the story withers in her hands, you lose the capacity for surprise. Your life's plot becomes less of a discovery, more of a controlled experiment. And in this strange feedback loop, the act of looking ahead is what causes the future to collapse back into the present, draining it of its unpredictability, its vitality. Think about the chess grandmaster who, after years of mastering every opening and endgame, can see 30 moves ahead. In a sense, the game loses its magic. The anticipation of surprise becomes so precise that the present is always eaten alive by the expected. Or take the investor who tracks every market signal, devours every forecast, and makes only the right trades. Eventually, the market itself adapts, shifting beneath the weight of all these informed predictions until no one can reliably beat it for long. The act of prediction becomes the very force that erodes its own usefulness. It's as if the universe resists being pinned down, like a river that changes course every time you try to build a dam across it. This effect haunts more ordinary moments, too. Have you ever rehearsed a conversation so many times in your mind that, when it finally happens, it feels hollow, scripted, like you've already lived it and moved on, or tried to preempt disappointment by imagining every possible setback, only to find yourself numb when reality arrives, robbed of the joy or even the sting that might have come from genuine uncertainty? In relationships, this can look like overanalyzing a partner's every word so that spontaneity suffocates under layers of anticipation. In careers, it's the worker who so perfectly anticipates office politics, so adeptly manages appearances, that authenticity becomes impossible and burnout inevitable. The future, once rich with possibility, becomes thin and gray, an echo of your own forecasts. There's a deeper cost here, one that can't be measured in lost surprise alone. When you become obsessed with anticipation, you subtly withdraw from the present. Each moment is filtered through a lens of what it could become, not what it actually is. The present becomes merely a staging ground for the next calculated move. Your actual experience is eroded, replaced by a simulation of what you expect to happen. And paradoxically, the more you try to control the future, the more unpredictable and unfulfilling it feels. On a societal scale, this effect becomes almost eerie. Consider economic bubbles, real estate, tech stocks, cryptocurrencies, where mass prediction leads to mass participation, which then collapses the very future everyone was banking on. Or the way viral trends burn out in days, not years, because everyone anticipates the next big thing, crowding into the same space, accelerating the demise of novelty. The act of prediction doesn't just shape the future, it undermines it, pulling the rug out from under the very expectations it creates. Even our collective search for happiness, fueled by data, psychology, self-help, sometimes leaves us emptier than before. When you know every hack for well-being, every study on gratitude or mindfulness, you risk turning your life into a laboratory, always measuring, always forecasting outcomes, never simply living. Joy, by nature, resists prediction. The most intense happiness often comes unbidden, in the moments you didn't see coming, couldn't have planned for, and can't recreate by force of will. The prediction erosion effect is not just a trap for the intelligent or the anxious. It's a fundamental tension in how humans relate to time. The brain evolved to anticipate, to learn from the past, forecast the future, and act in ways that maximize survival. But in a world flooded with information, tools, simulations, and AI-powered forecasts, we risk living in a hall of mirrors. Every prediction we make bounces back at us, subtly changing the outcome, until it's no longer clear whether we're seeing reality or just our own reflection, stretched thin across time. What's the way out? It's not to abandon prediction entirely, no one can. Instead, it's to recover the art of living with uncertainty, of holding your maps lightly, of letting go of the fantasy that the future is a puzzle to be solved, rather than a landscape to be explored. Sometimes, the wisest choice is to act with incomplete information, to allow space for the unplanned, to invite surprise and even risk into your life. Consider the traveler who lands in a new city with no itinerary, no grand plan. Her days unfold not in accordance with expectation, but in response to the world as it arrives. She is present, attentive, alive to possibility. The future here is not a corridor closing in, but a field opening up, precisely because she hasn't already mapped it to death. Or think of the musician improvising on stage, her fingers chasing sounds she can't anticipate, discovering new beauty precisely because she is willing to be surprised, to risk the unexpected. To escape the prediction erosion effect is to rediscover awe in the unfolding of life. It's to accept that no amount of calculation will ever capture the fullness of a moment lived authentically, with eyes open to wonder and the possibility of being wrong. It's realizing that the story of your life is richest not when you control every outcome, but when you let the path shift under your feet, letting the world surprise you and yourself in ways no prediction ever could. So, next time you find yourself trapped in a loop of analysis, chasing perfect foresight, pause, breathe, step into the unknown, not as a threat to be conquered, but as a horizon to be welcomed, because the future, in all its unpredictable, untamable glory, is not meant to be lived in advance. It's meant to be lived, moment by moment, uncertain and unrepeatable. And that is where the magic truly is. The pattern recognition curse. There is a peculiar burden carried by those who possess a mind finely tuned to detect patterns. To recognize order where others see chaos is often hailed as a gift, a sign of intelligence, insight, even genius. But this gift can become a curse. When the mind becomes overtrained in pattern recognition, it begins to see connections where none truly exist. Randomness no longer feels random. Noise, that inherent chaos of life, starts masquerading as meaningful signal. Imagine walking through a crowded city street, your senses bombarded with sounds, sights, and fragments of conversations. A pattern seeker's mind does not simply observe. It scans, filters, and stitches together disparate elements, seeking meaning, cause, and effect. A bird's call might seem linked to a distant horn. A flicker of shadow might appear as a deliberate sign. Suddenly, the world transforms into a complex tapestry of hidden messages and secret rhythms. At first, this hyper-awareness can be empowering. It allows breakthroughs in science, art, and problem-solving. History's greatest minds, from mathematicians deciphering the language of the universe to detectives unraveling mysteries, relied on this ability to detect patterns where others saw only noise. Yet, when taken too far, this same skill becomes a trap. The pattern recognition curse manifests as a relentless urge to find order, even in pure randomness. Take the gambler who insists there must be a reason for a losing streak, seeing a pattern in the spin of a roulette wheel, convinced a secret rhythm guides the outcomes. This illusion fuels compulsive behavior, irrational hope, and frustration. Or consider the conspiracy theorist who pieces together unrelated facts, coincidences, and rumors into a grand narrative of hidden forces controlling the world. The human mind, craving coherence and agency, constructs meaning from randomness, often at the cost of truth and clarity. Psychologists call this tendency apophenia, the perception of connections and patterns that aren't actually there. It's a cognitive glitch amplified in minds that have been trained, sometimes obsessively, to detect and interpret patterns. The more you search, the more you find. But not all findings are real. Many are illusions born of chance, coincidence, and your own eager brain. In everyday life, this curse can erode peace of mind. You might begin to suspect that random events, an email sent at an odd hour, a phrase overheard in passing, a momentary glance, carry hidden meanings aimed at you. Anxiety and paranoia creep in. Every coincidence becomes a coded message, every fragment a puzzle piece. The richness of randomness is lost, replaced by a suffocating web of false connections. Yet, this is not a flaw to be entirely feared. Pattern recognition is essential to human cognition. It allows us to learn, adapt, and survive. The key lies in balance, knowing when to trust the patterns you see and when to accept randomness as it is. One practical way to escape the curse is to develop skepticism toward your own interpretations. Question your assumptions. Could this pattern be coincidence? Is there empirical evidence supporting the connection? By introducing doubt, you allow space for uncertainty instead of forcing meaning where none exists. Mindfulness practices can also help. By training your awareness to observe without judgment, you learn to see patterns as just patterns, not messages or mandates. You become able to hold complexity and ambiguity simultaneously, embracing the chaotic beauty of randomness without needing to decode it. Consider the example of a weather pattern. A pattern recognizer might find cycles and trends, but they must also accept that weather contains elements of unpredictability. No pattern is absolute. The same applies to human experience. Not every event is connected. Not every coincidence significant. In science, this balance is critical. Researchers use rigorous statistical methods to distinguish signal from noise, to separate real effects from random variation. This discipline prevents the mind's natural urge to see patterns from leading us astray. The pattern recognition curse, then, is a paradox. It arises from our mind's power and vulnerability, the power to discern order, and the vulnerability to imagine it where it does not exist. It teaches us humility, reminding us that sometimes things just happen without reason or rhyme. To live with this curse is to dance on the edge of chaos and order, to embrace the mystery of randomness without surrendering to illusion. It is a challenge to see the world clearly, to respect complexity without collapsing into false narratives. Ultimately, freeing yourself from this curse means balancing the mind's hunger for meaning with a gentle acceptance of uncertainty. When noise is no longer mistaken for signal, peace returns, and the mind can rest, not in certainty, but in openness. This is the grace of true insight, to know when to connect the dots and when to let the dots remain free, dancing in the vast randomness of existence. The logic overload collapse. You start out with the best intentions. Maybe you were taught from a young age that clear thinking is a shield against chaos, that logic is the ultimate antidote to uncertainty. So you lean into it. You break down every problem into manageable pieces, analyze each variable, chart outcomes, calculate risks. Logic feels safe, sturdy, unshakable. If you just follow the rules, if you build a perfect web of rational understanding, nothing bad can slip through. That's how it begins, with the hunger for control, for order, for clarity in a messy world. But then the world pushes back, because life refuses to fit into neat logical boxes. Not everything can be measured, calculated, or predicted. At first, you try harder, refining your frameworks, tightening your definitions, seeking the flaw in your reasoning. You convince yourself that if you just become more precise, more methodical, then the world will finally submit to your model. This is the logic overload. the urge to keep building rational scaffolding, higher and higher, even as the foundations start to crack. You tell yourself that emotions are just noise, distractions from the real work of solving problems. Creativity becomes suspicious, its leaps too wild, its connections too loose. Intuition? That's the enemy of certainty, a rogue element you can't trust. So you start dismissing the quiet gut feelings, the spontaneous flashes of inspiration, the subtle emotional cues that used to guide you. You push them aside, believing that only logic deserves a seat at the table. Let's say you're working on a crucial project, something that matters deeply to you. You map out every possibility, anticipate every contingency, optimize every step. When a new idea bubbles up from somewhere deeper, a spark of intuition, you analyze it to death. Does this make sense? Is it justified? Is there any evidence? If it doesn't survive the logical gauntlet, it's discarded. You become suspicious even of your own preferences and desires, questioning whether they are rational enough to be trusted. As the days go by, you notice the work is stalling, your mind tightening. The more you reach for logic, the less progress you make. You feel a subtle panic rising, a sense that something essential is slipping through your fingers. In relationships, this collapse is even more painful. Someone you love expresses hurt or joy or longing, and you immediately start analyzing. What exactly triggered this reaction? Is it consistent with past behavior? What is the rational response? You miss the human element entirely. When your own emotions surface, you question their validity instead of listening. Is this anger justified? Is this happiness rational? Every feeling gets put under the microscope, dissected for logical coherence, until none of them feel real anymore. You become a stranger to your own experience, running calculations while life passes you by. Over time, something strange happens. You don't feel more in control. Instead, you feel hollowed out, brittle. The more you try to rationalize, the less certain you become. Your inner world, once rich with texture and possibility, starts to look like a spreadsheet, ordered, but lifeless. You might find yourself exhausted, unable to make even simple choices. Every action demands a logical proof. Every decision waits for evidence that will never be complete. It's a collapse not of logic itself, but of the human spirit inside it. Think of the chess master who, obsessed with analyzing every move, forgets the joy of the game, or the musician who overthinks every note, strangling the flow of improvisation until only rigid technique remains. Even the scientist can fall into this trap, valuing only what can be quantified, ignoring the aha moments that come unbidden, the creative leaps that rewrite the rules. In every field, this logic overload becomes a prison, walls built to keep out chaos, but which also keep out everything alive, uncertain, and vital. This collapse isn't just theoretical, it's physical, emotional. Your body tenses, your breath shallows. You wake up at 3 a.m., mind racing, replaying arguments and choices, seeking the perfect answer. You're unable to rest until everything is explained, and nothing ever is. The collapse comes quietly, sometimes all at once, a burnout, a creative block, a sudden inability to feel joy or wonder. You may even long for the days when life was messier, when you trusted your instincts, when not every moment demanded a reason. The paradox is cruel. The more you try to control uncertainty with logic, the more anxious and uncertain you become. You may start to distrust yourself, believing that if you ever let your guard down, if you listen to your gut or allow yourself to feel, you'll make some catastrophic error. But in truth, the real danger is not chaos, but the brittle fragility of a mind cut off from its own depths. What's lost in the collapse is not just spontaneity, but wholeness. Logic is not the enemy, but it was never meant to stand alone. Human beings are not computers. We are not made to live only by proofs and deductions. Intuition is a kind of fast, unconscious logic, built on years of pattern recognition, subtle signals, lived experience. Emotion is information, a language your body uses to guide you through complexity when facts alone are not enough. Creativity is the bridge between what is and what could be, the spark that logic can never fully predict or explain. The way out of the collapse is not to reject logic, but to remember what it's for, a tool, not a tyrant. You can invite emotion and intuition back to the table. Let creativity run wild before logic steps in to refine. Sometimes the answer you're seeking arrives only after you give up looking for it, after you let go of precision and allow yourself to drift, to wonder, to feel. If you've ever felt this collapse, this aching sense that your inner world has narrowed to a cage of proofs and formulas, know that you're not broken. The collapse is not a sign of failure, but of imbalance. The mind craves both order and mystery, clarity and surprise. It's possible to build a life where logic and intuition hold hands, where creativity flourishes alongside precision, where emotion is not a flaw to be debugged, but a compass pointing to what matters. Ultimately, life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be lived. And while logic can help you build the scaffolding, it's the wild, uncertain, beautifully human parts of yourself that fill in the colors, the melodies, the meaning. When logic collapses under its own weight, let it be an invitation, not to think less, but to feel and imagine more. The world outside your spreadsheets is waiting, vivid and uncontained, if only you'll dare to step back into it. The simulation hypothesis. Loop. Imagine lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, as a strange thought slips through the cracks in your consciousness. What if all of this is not real? Not in the usual sense, not just a dream, but a constructed simulation, a coded world running on rules you'll never see. For a moment, the idea feels thrilling, almost liberating. But the deeper you wander into this possibility, the more the floor beneath your reality starts to soften and blur. You're not just questioning the world outside, you're questioning the very act of questioning itself. And soon, you find yourself caught inside a paradoxical loop, one that can unravel the threads of your most basic certainties. This is the simulation hypothesis loop, a real psychological event that can quietly devour your sense of what's real, what's imagined, and what it even means to question the difference. Let's start with a simple scenario. You're sitting at your desk, maybe sipping coffee, scrolling through your phone, reading about new breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, or the latest advances in virtual reality. Someone mentions the simulation hypothesis, the idea, made popular by philosophers and physicists alike, that you could be living inside a highly sophisticated computer program, so advanced you could never distinguish it from real reality. At first, the idea seems like harmless science fiction, but then you start thinking, if it were true, would there be any way to know? What would count as evidence? What if everything you ever experienced, your childhood memories, your dreams, your fears, was just data? A narrative assembled for your benefit, or perhaps for someone else's entertainment. It sounds dramatic, but these thoughts are not as rare as they might seem. They have haunted philosophers for centuries. Descartes wondered whether an evil demon might be deceiving him. Modern thinkers ask if a sufficiently advanced civilization could simulate universes as easily as we run video games. The simulation hypothesis is a natural extension of these doubts, intensified by every leap in technology. But here's where the loop begins. You start to question whether your perceptions are genuine, or merely the output of some algorithm. But then, a subtler anxiety appears. If you're questioning reality, who is doing the questioning? Is it really you, or just another part of the simulation, programmed to question itself? This is where the spiral tightens. You don't just question what you see. You question the questioner, the self that doubts, the internal narrator you've always trusted. Are your doubts real, or are they also simulated, artificial, maybe even planted by the system to keep you occupied? You try to step outside the thought, but every step you take only reveals another layer of recursion. Is this real? Turns into, am I real? Which becomes, is the part of me that asks if I'm real, itself real? Like facing two mirrors reflecting each other into infinity, the questions loop endlessly, each one devouring the one before. You begin to notice details that you never saw before. The way memories sometimes glitch, the sense of déjà vu, the moments when life seems a little too coincidental. Did you really choose this? Or is it all pre-scripted? Maybe that strange thing you saw out of the corner of your eye wasn't your imagination, but a flicker in the code. Even the act of doubting, of challenging your own perceptions, can feel staged. The more you search for proof, the more you realize you're trapped inside your own logic, circling a question with no outside reference point. It's not just philosophy. It's a psychological experience that can become all-consuming. Take the story of someone who, after reading too much about simulated universes, starts to notice how events in their life line up too perfectly, as if designed by a storyteller. They wonder if their friends and family are real, or just non-player characters, code written to keep them on track. They begin testing the world, flipping light switches, speaking out loud to an empty room, looking for evidence that the world will break character. Every answer they get, every normal response feels suspect, almost too normal. Is the simulation adapting to their tests, staying one step ahead, rewriting itself to maintain the illusion? This mental loop isn't limited to science fiction fans or philosophers. It can happen to anyone who asks just a little too insistently, how do I know what's real? And the more intelligent, curious, or imaginative you are, the deeper the loop can pull you. For some, it's a passing thought. For others, it becomes a recursive spiral that can border on obsession, even derealization. The world loses its solidity, and every attempt to reground yourself only leads to another layer of questioning. And here's the kicker, the simulation hypothesis. Loop is, in itself, a kind of simulation. Every question you ask generates more questions, each one further from the solid ground of experience. You try to anchor yourself with evidence, but evidence itself becomes suspect. The process of thinking, doubting, seeking becomes the very thing that removes you from the world you're trying to understand. Consider for a moment the technology we use every day. You might wake up to a phone alarm, spend your day working on a computer, then relax with a movie that's mostly computer-generated effects. Increasingly, our lives are filtered through screens and algorithms, and the line between the virtual and the real grows thinner every year. We play games in worlds with their own physics and histories. We build digital identities that sometimes feel more authentic than our physical ones. So, when the simulation hypothesis arises, it doesn't feel as far-fetched as it once did. In a sense, we are already living in simulations, created by ourselves, and for each other. But what's the way out of this loop? Is there any escape from questioning the questioner, doubting the doubter, spiraling down the rabbit hole until even the ground beneath your thoughts feels uncertain? Perhaps the answer is not to escape, but to accept the limits of the loop itself. Maybe it's not about finding proof that you're real, or the world is real, or the questioner inside your head is real. Maybe it's about letting the question stand, unanswered, unsolved, while you return to living, feeling, and experiencing as if it all matters. Because even if it is a simulation, it's the only one you have. And maybe, just maybe, the willingness to live with uncertainty is the highest form of intelligence in a world where certainty is impossible. The simulation hypothesis loop can blur the edges of reality, but it can also reveal just how precious your experiences, your choices, and your moments of wonder really are. If everything is simulated, then every feeling, every relationship, every act of creativity, every doubt even, carries meaning only because you decide it does. So the next time you find yourself caught in the loop, questioning reality, questioning yourself, and then questioning the questioner, remember, sometimes the wisest thing you can do is simply choose to be present. Live the simulation, if that's what it is, with all the curiosity, courage, and joy you can muster. Let the questions swirl, but don't let them steal the only thing that can never be simulated, your conscious, living engagement with the world, however mysterious it may be. The impostor amplification effect. Picture this. You finally reach a goal you've been chasing for years, a promotion, a published book, a hard-won degree. For a moment, you expect relief, even a rush of pride. But instead, a whisper begins to echo in your mind. You don't really belong here, do you? Suddenly, every new skill you acquire, every milestone you pass, is shadowed by a growing sense that you've only fooled everyone, including yourself. This is the impostor amplification effect. It's not just imposter syndrome, it's the strange paradox where each achievement, each layer of competence doesn't silence your doubts, but actually turns up their volume. You learn more, you win more, and yet you feel the fraudulence growing, not shrinking. The more you know, the sharper your sense of all you don't know. And that gap becomes so vivid, so convincing, that your success feels like the greatest accident of all. Let's dig into how this works in real life. Imagine a young researcher, brilliant and driven. She's just landed her first major publication in a respected journal. For years, she worked in the shadows, envying people who seemed born to academic confidence. Now, as her name sits alongside accomplished scholars, her mind starts racing. What if they realize my methods weren't as rigorous as they seemed? What if they missed a flaw in my logic? Instead of feeling validated, she's consumed by the knowledge of every corner she hasn't explored, every technique she's never mastered, every theoretical gap she now sees thanks to her deeper understanding. Her achievement doesn't crown her with certainty. It makes her see even more vividly how far she has left to go. It's a cruel joke of self-awareness. You spend years becoming more capable, and in doing so, you become more aware of the complexity, the depth, the impossibility of ever knowing enough. What once seemed simple and impressive now feels like just the beginning of a vast mountain you barely started to climb. The more competent you become, the clearer you see the landscape of your own ignorance. Every time you achieve something new, the impostor voice says, "But now that you know this, don't you see how much you don't know? Surely someone else is more deserving? Surely you just got lucky this time." This is the impostor amplification effect. Achievement magnifies, not mutes, your sense of fraudulence. This effect is everywhere, among doctors, scientists, artists, even CEOs. Consider the story of an award-winning novelist. Early in her career, she hungered for external validation. She thought that a prestigious prize would silence her doubts forever. But after the win, the pressure only grew. She now saw her work compared to even greater authors. The more she learned about storytelling, the more flaws she saw in her own writing. Where readers praised her originality, she saw derivative echoes and unfinished thoughts. The irony is stunning. Success unlocks new doors, but behind each one is a room full of even more intimidating possibilities. More standards you haven't yet met. More knowledge you've barely scratched. Instead of feeling like a champion, you feel like a child wandering lost through a castle built by giants. Why does this happen? Partly, it's the result of a mind that grows through learning. In childhood, we see experts as nearly omniscient. As we become more knowledgeable ourselves, we learn how little we actually grasp. That awareness isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of intellectual growth. The real experts are the ones who see the horizon of their ignorance, who know how vast and shifting knowledge truly is. But our culture often celebrates certainty and bravado, rewarding those who seem least troubled by doubt. We're rarely told that the best in any field feel, at times, like frauds looking over their shoulders, terrified of being exposed. Nowhere is this clearer than in fields that move fast: science, technology, business. Picture an engineer, newly promoted to lead a team on a major project. She's spent years learning her craft, fixing bugs, designing systems, quietly building mastery. But as soon as she's at the helm, she notices what she doesn't know: the limits of her technical knowledge, the gaps in her leadership experience, the subtle politics she never studied. She becomes more aware of all the ways she could fail. Every new responsibility is both a reward and a magnifier for her imposter feelings. If only they knew how little I'm sure of. If only they saw the doubts beneath the surface. The imposter amplification effect is especially brutal in creative work, where the standards are so subjective and the audience's expectations so high. Musicians, actors, writers, those whose careers are built on personal expression, are acutely sensitive to this paradox. Each achievement draws more eyes. Each round of praise raises the stakes. The more visible you become, the more you sense your own limitations. You realize there's always another level, always a deeper mastery that remains out of reach. As you move forward, you carry with you not the satisfaction of certainty, but the burden of expanded perspective. You become a critic of your own evolution. This effect is not limited to the ultra-talented. In fact, it may be strongest in those who care the most, those who strive, who hunger, who genuinely want to understand the world and themselves. The more earnestly you pursue truth, the more honestly you see your gaps. And when you look around, you imagine that others are different. They seem so sure, so composed, so fluent in their roles. But in private, they're haunted by the same doubts, wrestling with the same illusion that everyone else is more real, more deserving, more at home in their success. There's a strange comfort in knowing that even the world's best feel this way. Maya Angelou once said, "I have written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now." Albert Einstein confessed that he felt like an involuntary swindler, whose work didn't deserve its fame. These aren't the words of frauds, but of people who understood how little any one of us can truly know, no matter how much we achieve. So, how do you live with the imposter amplification effect? First, by recognizing that it's a sign of growth, not failure. Your doubts do not discredit you. They prove you are still learning, still humble, still open to the immensity of what you don't know. Second, you remind yourself that nobody ever knows enough. The feeling that it's all a mistake is, ironically, one of the most universal experiences of genuine achievement. When it surfaces, see it as proof that you are exploring new territory, pushing into realms that demand your uncertainty. And finally, let yourself be human. Accept the possibility that you are both extraordinary and incomplete, both competent and forever unfinished. Let your growing awareness of what you don't know fuel your curiosity, not your fear. Your path is not a line from ignorance to mastery, but a spiral of learning, doubting, and learning again. When you feel like a fraud, remember, the imposter voice only gets louder because you have stepped into a larger room, a room where you belong, precisely because you can see how much there is left to understand. The imposter amplification effect isn't a sign you're an imposter. It's proof you're alive, awake, and still moving forward. The intelligent shame reflex. From the moment you're labeled as the smart one, something invisible but weighty settles over your shoulders. At first, it feels like a light, a source of pride, a private superpower. Teachers beam at you, relatives nod approvingly, friends joke about borrowing your brain. The praise seeps in, warm and affirming. But as years pass, that same label, so sweet at first, can quietly warp into a pressure so subtle and corrosive that you barely notice it. Until the day comes when you make a mistake and feel something deeper than embarrassment. You feel betrayal, not of others, but of yourself, and the fragile identity you've been told to protect. This is the intelligence shame reflex. Imagine a child, head bent over a math test, heart pounding. All eyes are on her, at least in her mind, because she's always the one with the right answer. Her own self-worth now feels fused with never slipping, never faltering. And then, she freezes. Her mind blanks. Panic spikes. She's not just worried about the grade. She's terrified that a single wrong answer will tear down everything people believe about her. One stumble, and the image shatters. This isn't ordinary shame. This is existential shame, rooted not in the outcome, but in the fear of losing her entire role in the world. The intelligent shame reflex is a psychological trap that catches you precisely because you once felt so valued. When intelligence becomes the cornerstone of your identity, any mistake is no longer just a blip. It feels like an exposure. If you're the smart one, a slip is evidence that you were a fraud all along. The same mind that used to leap at new challenges now recoils, seeking to hide mistakes instead of confronting them. You start to avoid risk, skirt around difficult problems, or shrink away from opportunities that might threaten the illusion of perfection. Learning, which once felt like freedom, now feels like a minefield. Maybe you recognize this reflex in your own life. Maybe you remember the first time you deliberately hid a bad grade, or pretended to understand something you didn't, just to preserve that precious reputation. Or maybe you became hypervigilant, preemptively offering disclaimers. I might be wrong, but so that if you failed, the blow wouldn't be as sharp. Or perhaps you began to select only the safe, winnable paths, the classes you knew you'd ace, the jobs that wouldn't stretch you, the conversations where you already knew all the answers. Each time you chose safety over growth, the walls closed in a little tighter. Consider the adult who never learned to fail safely. Every slip-up at work triggers waves of anxiety and self-doubt. Even when no one is watching, the internal judge is merciless. How could you be so stupid? You should have known better. Praise has become a poison, a standard impossible to maintain, and the weight of every small mistake echoes much louder than any accomplishment. This reflex doesn't only live in school or work, it infiltrates relationships. You might fear being truly known by others, because if they saw your confusion or vulnerability, they might withdraw their admiration. Intimacy feels dangerous. The cost of a mistake is no longer just disappointment. It's the risk of exile from the community that once celebrated you. What makes this effect so devastating is that it can stunt growth at the root. When your sense of worth depends on not failing, genuine learning grinds to a halt. You become an expert at self-censorship, filtering your thoughts before they ever leave your lips. The mind, once expansive and curious, becomes a fortress designed to protect you from ever appearing foolish. But fortresses, for all their strength, are also prisons. Let's look deeper at how this reflex forms and why it's so persistent. Praise, especially for innate ability, wires the brain in peculiar ways. When children are told they're smart, their focus shifts from process, I worked hard, I tried something new, to performance, I am intelligent, I should always succeed. Failure is no longer a chance to learn, but a threat to the core story about who they are. Research in developmental psychology has shown that children praised for intelligence, rather than effort, become less resilient, more afraid to tackle new challenges, and quicker to give up when things get tough. The intelligence label becomes a glass box, beautiful to look at, suffocating to live inside. Even as adults, many carry this burden unconsciously. They may become perfectionists, driven by a gnawing fear of exposure, or they may hide their true ambitions, never risking enough to experience the kind of deep failure that leads to real mastery. The result? A life half-lived, shadowed by caution, haunted by the constant need to prove themselves worthy. There's a strange paradox at play here. The more you hide your mistakes, the more likely you are to stagnate. True intelligence, true growth, demands failure. It demands the humility to admit what you don't know, the curiosity to explore new territory, and the courage to look foolish in front of others. But when shame is triggered by even the smallest error, your mind learns to avoid these very experiences, all in the name of protecting a fragile image. Perhaps you felt the sting of this reflex in subtle moments, holding your tongue in meetings, declining invitations that feel out of your depth, secretly Googling terms you pretend to know. Maybe you've felt the exhaustion that comes from maintaining a facade, or the private anger when someone else points out a mistake you'd hoped to hide. Maybe you've even started to resent the very praise that once made you feel special, because it now feels like a chain rather than a gift. But there is a way out, a slow, deliberate process of unlearning. It starts with recognizing that intelligence is not a fixed trait, but a living, breathing process. Mistakes are not evidence of inadequacy. They are signs that you are pushing against your own limits, daring to stretch beyond what's comfortable. The moments you stumble are not betrayals, but invitations to deeper understanding. It also helps to remember that everyone carries their own secret bundle of errors, doubts, and regrets. Even those who seem effortlessly brilliant are wrestling with their own fear of being exposed. The courage to admit your limits, to laugh at your mistakes, to ask questions without shame, to welcome correction. These are the marks of real wisdom, not just intellect. In the end, the intelligent shame reflex is a story about the dangers of confusing praise with love and achievement with worth. Your mind is not a stage to impress others. It is a garden to be cultivated. Growth is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes deeply humbling. But only by risking the exposure of your flaws can you discover the full range of your potential. So, if you find yourself shrinking away from challenge, haunted by the ghost of past praise, remember, every mistake is not a betrayal, but a bridge to learning, to connection, and to a richer, more authentic self. The world doesn't need your perfection. It needs your willingness to grow again and again in the open light. The curiosity drain dilemma. Curiosity is one of the most beautiful and essential forces that drive human experience. It sparks discovery, fuels creativity, and propels us toward knowledge and growth. It is the light that guides us into the unknown, the whisper that invites us to ask, what if, or why? But there is a paradox hidden within this flame. Sometimes, when we dig too deep, when we seek to solve every mystery completely and exhaustively, the very wonder that ignited our curiosity begins to fade. This is the curiosity drain dilemma, a haunting cycle where the act of solving a question drains the magic that made it worth pursuing in the first place. Think about a child marveling at the stars. To their eyes, the night sky is a vast ocean of mystery, twinkling with secrets and stories. Each star is a spark of infinite possibility, a beacon of imagination. But as we grow, we learn the science behind those stars, the nuclear reactions, the distances measured in light years, the chemical compositions. With every explanation, the mystery shrinks. The stars become data points, facts, formulas. The magic is replaced by knowledge. And while knowledge is powerful, it often lacks the ineffable enchantment of not knowing. This dilemma plays out in countless realms. The scientist who spends years unraveling a complex phenomenon may find that the answer, once revealed, feels anticlimactic. The poet who explores the depths of human emotion might discover truth so clinical or simple that the initial awe dissipates. Even in relationships, understanding every motive or predicting every behavior can strip away spontaneity and surprise, turning vibrant connection into mechanical interaction. Why does this happen? Curiosity thrives on the unknown. It is not just the quest for answers, but the dance with mystery itself that enlivens us. When a question remains open, it invites imagination, hope, and possibility. But once an answer is found, the space for wonder narrows. The narrative becomes closed, the horizon limited. This is not to say that knowledge is the enemy. Far from it. Knowledge empowers and illuminates. But the curiosity-drained dilemma warns us to be mindful of how we pursue understanding. There is a delicate balance between seeking answers and preserving the awe that makes life rich. Consider the experience of reading a gripping novel or watching a suspenseful film. The tension, the unanswered questions, the unknown outcomes hold us captive. But if the story is explained in exhaustive detail beforehand, the thrill evaporates. The magic lies in the uncertainty. Similarly, in art, music, and spirituality, mystery is a source of beauty and meaning. The unsolved questions invite personal interpretation and emotional engagement. They allow the mind to wander and create rather than merely receive. How can we navigate this dilemma? One way is to embrace the limits of our curiosity, to know when to stop digging and simply sit with the question. Sometimes, the joy is not in solving, but in contemplating. Letting the mystery live alongside the knowledge can preserve wonder. Another approach is to cultivate a sense of playful curiosity, where exploration is an ongoing process rather than a destination. Instead of demanding definitive answers, we allow questions to evolve, opening new paths of inquiry and imagination. We can also honor the emotional and poetic dimensions of curiosity. Some questions are not meant to be fully solved, but felt, experienced, and revisited with fresh eyes. The magic remains when we accept ambiguity as part of the journey. Ultimately, the curiosity-drained dilemma reminds us that wonder is fragile. It flourishes in the spaces between ignorance and understanding, between the known and the unknown. It is a sacred tension that fuels creativity, joy, and meaning. So, cherish your questions. Dive deep, but don't drown the mystery. Let your curiosity be a light that guides, not a shovel that buries. Because sometimes, the greatest magic lies not in answers, but in the questions themselves, ever vibrant, ever alive, forever inviting. The recursive self-upgrade loop. You begin with ambition, a hunger to improve yourself, to become smarter, sharper, more efficient every day. You devour books, chase every new productivity system, run your mind through the gauntlet of self-analysis and mental upgrades. Each new insight feels like a triumph. You imagine your future self as a kind of enlightened machine, running smoothly, each weakness patched, each inefficiency erased. You chase this future version of yourself, believing that with enough discipline and knowledge, you can finally reach the summit where flaws no longer haunt you. At first, the process feels intoxicating. You learn a new technique, maybe mindfulness, speed reading, cognitive behavioral hacks. You install this new software, and suddenly you're better than before. Your thoughts are clearer, your habits sharper. You see yourself making fewer mistakes, catching yourself before old habits trip you up. The initial boost is real and exhilarating, but almost immediately, something else happens. Your awareness sharpens, and with it comes a more ruthless internal critic. The smarter you become, the more acutely you perceive your mind's micro-failures. Where you once overlooked minor anxieties, now you spot the subtle self-sabotages, hesitations, rationalizations, even the ways your own optimization strategies become their own distractions. Each self-upgrade reveals not only new abilities, but also a new landscape of imperfections. It's like shining a brighter flashlight into the attic of your mind. The more powerful the beam, the more dust and cobwebs you notice, things that were invisible in the half-light of before. It's easy to mistake this for progress, and in some ways, it is. You're not deluding yourself, but there's a hidden cost. Each cycle of self-improvement raises the standards for what you will accept from yourself. Where a small victory used to satisfy you, now it's just the new baseline. You recalibrate instantly. If I could fix that flaw, why am I still tolerating this other one? The finish line moves forward every day. What started as a quest for mastery has become a treadmill where perfection recedes with every stride. The loop tightens. Each time you upgrade, you feel a flash of accomplishment, quickly followed by a shadow of inadequacy. How did I miss this problem before, you wonder? If I'm so much better now, why does this new flaw sting even worse? There's a strange cruelty in this. Your intelligence amplifies your sensitivity to your own errors. You see further, so you spot more cracks. Self-awareness becomes its own kind of curse. Consider the programmer who optimizes their code, only to uncover a deeper inefficiency hiding in the architecture. Each round of debugging reveals another layer of complexity, another edge case that can't be caught by previous logic. Or the philosopher who refines their reasoning, peeling away fallacies, only to realize how much their values are shaped by biases and blind spots they never suspected. The more rigorous their thinking, the less confident they become in the infallibility of their own mind. In daily life, this loop looks like chasing the latest life hack, only to discover that hacking your habits can be its own distraction, obsessing over productivity instead of living, tracking your sleep until you can't sleep without tracking, questioning if your metacognition is meta enough. Even your attempts to relax or just be present are scrutinized by a restless mind. Am I meditating right? Am I failing at self-care? It's recursive. Every solution creates a new level of problem to be solved. And so, the smarter you get, the more you see the distance between who you are and who you wish you could be. The more complex your self-understanding, the more ways you find to fall short. Perfection becomes not a destination, but a vanishing point, always receding as your vision expands. In its most intense form, the recursive self-upgrade loop is exhausting, not empowering. You can't simply enjoy your growth because each milestone is just a new vantage point from which to spot your remaining flaws. People on the outside may see your improvement, your discipline, your brilliance, but inside, you feel like you're racing a shadow, one that always stays just out of reach. You might even envy the version of yourself who didn't see these flaws, who was content in ignorance. Ironically, the more you optimize, the more haunted you become by the impossibility of total optimization. This is not a failure of willpower or ambition. It's a side effect of the self-reflective mind, a paradox built into the nature of growth itself. When you expand your awareness, you inevitably expand your awareness of what you lack. You chase the horizon, but it always moves. Your new strengths let you see new weaknesses. Your new wisdom makes you acutely aware of how much you don't know. So, how do you break the loop? The answer isn't to stop growing, to stop learning, or to lower your standards until nothing matters. It's to recognize that growth is not about closing the gap to perfection, but about widening your capacity to hold imperfection with compassion. The ultimate upgrade isn't in erasing all your flaws, but in developing a kind of wise humility, a sense of humor, even, about your own limitations. You become fluent in paradox, improving while accepting, striving while surrendering, advancing while forgiving. You learn to celebrate progress without making happiness depend on some final upgrade. The horizon is always moving, but you don't have to chase it forever. Sometimes, the smartest move is to stop and notice the ground beneath your feet, the ordinary, imperfect present, rich with flaws you no longer need to fear. Because the greatest minds, throughout history, are not those who reached perfection, but those who learned to live gracefully within the endless, recursive loop of becoming. The journey is infinite. The beauty lies in the fact that every upgrade reveals not just more work to do, but more mystery, more wonder, and more depth to the human experience itself. The trap of knowing too much. What happens when your gift for understanding becomes a silent curse? There is a paradox that stalks the most curious, the most perceptive, the ones who want to know how everything works. It's the trap of knowing too much, a state where insight turns toxic, and the clarity you once chased blurs into a haze of skepticism and quiet despair. This isn't the loneliness of ignorance. It's the isolation of having pierced the veil, only to find that knowledge itself can become a prison. You start out searching for answers, but in the end, the very answers you collect threaten to dissolve the foundations of meaning itself. Think about the first time you discovered how a magic trick worked. Maybe as a child, you were transfixed by the illusion, cards that appeared from nowhere, coins that vanished in a swirl of sleight of hand. The not knowing was intoxicating. Your imagination ran wild with possibilities. But then, you learned the trick. You saw the hidden moves, the secret pockets, the psychology behind misdirection. The spell broke, the wonder vanished, and now, when you see the trick again, you can't unsee the gears and wires. The magic is gone, replaced by a kind of mechanical disappointment. Now, extend that experience far beyond stage magic, into the mechanics of the world itself. Imagine understanding politics so deeply that you see the manipulations behind every policy. Imagine knowing economics so well that every price tag is a signal, every market is a game, every incentive is transparent. Or dive into psychology, learning so much about cognitive biases and evolutionary drives that you can no longer take anyone's motives at face value, not even your own. The more you know, the less room there is for innocence, or even for trust. At first, knowledge is empowering. It helps you navigate complexity, avoid pitfalls, outsmart the traps laid by the careless and the cunning. But then a slow shift occurs. You begin to see systems everywhere, feedback loops, algorithms, incentive structures, hidden agendas. The world, once colorful and chaotic, becomes more like a code to be cracked, a puzzle whose pieces can always be explained away. You start to notice that good things happen for cynical reasons, that idealism is often a mask, that even acts of kindness can be traced to self-interest or subconscious programming. Instead of wonder, you feel weariness. Instead of hope, you sense hollowness. This is the trap. You understand so much that you lose faith in the very systems you've unraveled. You stop believing in stories, in causes, in the possibility of real change. Politics? Just power games. Love? A set of chemical impulses and evolutionary drives. Progress? A statistical blip, always subject to regression or reversal. Your knowledge, once a lantern, now casts long shadows. The more you illuminate, the more you see the limits and flaws, and eventually, you stop searching for the light at all. Think of the whistleblower who sees the rot in institutions they once revered and can never look at them the same way, or the scientist who spends years uncovering the randomness and indifference of nature and starts to feel that nothing really matters, or the tech worker who builds tools for connection, only to witness how those tools breed addiction, polarization, or despair. In every case, deep understanding brings not peace, but a kind of existential vertigo. There are moments when this trap becomes almost physical. You sit at a dinner table, hearing someone speak with conviction about changing the world, and you feel a sad distance. You know the statistics, the cycles, the ways things can backfire. You want to believe, but the machinery of your own mind works against you. Even joy can feel like a joke played by your own awareness, brief, predictable, untrustworthy. In the quiet hours, you wonder if knowledge has made you wise, or just numb. But the trap of knowing too much isn't only a personal phenomenon, it shapes entire cultures. We live in an age of transparency and overexposure. Every scandal is dissected in real time, every motive questioned, every flaw exposed. Skepticism becomes the default, sincerity feels naive, and the loudest voices are often those who mock hope as foolishness. Irony and cynicism become a shield, because if you care too openly, someone will always point out the hypocrisy, the hidden interest, the system behind the sentiment. And yet, even as knowledge threatens to breed nihilism, there is still a way out, a way to hold wisdom without losing meaning. It starts by remembering that systems, for all their flaws, are inhabited by people who are messy, unpredictable, sometimes even genuinely good. You can see the puppet strings and still be moved by the story. You can recognize the flaws in a cause and still fight for something better. The point of understanding isn't to lose faith, but to choose where to place it with eyes open, knowing that imperfections do not erase the possibility of value. It's possible to live inside the paradox, to know that the world is broken, manipulated, and imperfect, and still seek beauty, connection, and meaning. Wisdom is not the absence of doubt, but the ability to act in spite of it. The trap only closes when you believe that knowledge is the end of wonder. In truth, knowledge can be the beginning of a deeper, more conscious awe. The awe of seeing clearly, caring anyway, and daring to hope even when you know all the reasons not to. So the next time your insight threatens to harden into cynicism, ask yourself, will you use what you know to withdraw or to engage more deeply? The world needs your clarity, but it also needs your willingness to be surprised, to risk disappointment, and to believe in the possibility of something more. Don't let the trap of knowing too much steal your capacity for wonder. Let it refine your hope, not destroy it. That, in the end, is the wisdom that knowledge alone can never offer. The intelligence confirmation maze. Imagine you're debating a topic, any topic, something you've spent years thinking about, researching, building arguments for. At first, you're uncertain, even a little insecure, but the more you read, the more you practice, the sharper your arguments become. Over time, you learn how to anticipate every objection, how to dismantle criticism with facts, analogies, data, and style. You build mental frameworks so strong that even your own doubts can't easily get in. At some point, a strange thing happens. You realize you're not just convincing others, you're convincing yourself. You have become the architect of an impregnable fortress of reason, each brick made of evidence, every corridor guarded by clever retorts. But behind those walls, you start to wonder, do you still know how to recognize when you're wrong, or have you built a maze so perfect you can never escape it? Oh, this is the intelligence confirmation maze, a hidden paradox that quietly turns smart people into prisoners of their own mastery. Let's get real about how this happens. Picture a university student entering philosophy or law. At first, the landscape is dizzying, a jungle of ideas and counterpoints. But with time, their skill grows. They learn the right moves, the persuasive language, the precise angles that can twist uncertainty into authority. With every debate, they gain confidence, and with confidence comes a new vulnerability, the temptation to see their own arguments as unassailable. After all, if every challenge can be met, if every objection is easily neutralized, then surely their view is the correct one, right? And so, the maze begins. You build up your position so thoroughly, so artfully, that the very strength of your defense becomes a kind of blindness. You are so adept at confirming your intelligence, at defending your worldview, that you stop noticing where it might be incomplete or flawed. It's not arrogance, at least not always. Sometimes it's the natural result of trying to think clearly in a confusing world. We crave certainty. We work hard to explain things, not just to others, but to ourselves. And when we're rewarded for being logical, consistent, and confident, we double down. But here's the danger. Airtight logic can feel like truth, even when it isn't. The most dangerous errors aren't the obvious ones. They're the subtle miscalculations that hide in elegant reasoning, protected by the fact that you know how to argue so well. Think about the classic echo chamber effect on social media. It's easy to mock, people surrounding themselves with those who already agree. But the intelligence confirmation maze goes deeper. You don't just filter out outside opinions. You create an entire self-sustaining system of logic that absorbs, explains, and neutralizes any threat to your viewpoint. You get so good at explaining yourself that even genuine criticism gets reframed as proof of your insight, or dismissed as ignorance. Every contradiction becomes an opportunity to showcase your intelligence, not to re-examine your premise. Over time, the maze becomes so intricate that it feels like a world unto itself, a world where you always win, but never really learn. Let's see how this works in real life. Imagine a successful entrepreneur known for their bold ideas. Every decision is justified with data, stories, frameworks, and principles. They become a master of their own narrative, able to connect the dots so convincingly that even failures seem like necessary steps in their grand plan. They're so adept at post-rationalizing that setbacks can't truly shake their confidence. But what if some of those decisions were genuinely wrong? What if, lost in the maze of self-confirming logic, they fail to see the real lessons? Clues that only humility and vulnerability can reveal. This maze is even more insidious in fields that prize intellectual power. Academia, science, law, politics. The smarter you are, the more tools you have to build the maze. Every paper, every presentation, every debate adds more walls and hidden passageways. You cite research that supports you. You reinterpret evidence to fit your theory. And when you encounter opposition, you sharpen your arguments rather than rethink your assumptions. You become so fluent in self-defense that it's almost impossible to tell when your ideas are wrong, or worse, when they're just sophisticated errors. The confirmation maze is a trap for individuals, but it's also a collective risk. History is littered with examples. Financial crises fueled by brilliant analysts who explained away risk. Scientific dogmas that persisted for decades because no one could argue effectively against them. political systems propped up by dazzling rhetoric and relentless confirmation. When enough people build their own mazes, society itself can lose its bearings, mistaking elaborate rationalizations for wisdom. And here's the catch. The smarter you are, the more seductive the maze becomes. You start to trust the strength of your own arguments more than the complexity of reality. You stop listening, not because you're stubborn, but because you're so used to being right. Every time you prove yourself again, the maze grows tighter, the exits harder to find. So, how do you break out? It takes a radical kind of humility. You have to court the possibility of being wrong, even when it feels deeply uncomfortable. You have to let outsiders poke holes in your logic, not so you can patch them up, but so you can actually see what's missing. You need to spend time with people who think differently, not just to debate them, but to listen. And most of all, you must develop a suspicion of your own cleverness. The best thinkers in history were never the ones who trusted their logic the most. They were the ones who doubted it the most, who made a practice of looking for ways they might be fooling themselves. If you feel the pull of the intelligence confirmation maze, remember, the purpose of thinking isn't just to defend your ideas, but to discover the limits of your understanding. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is admit you don't know. Sometimes the only way out of the maze is to risk stepping outside, into uncertainty, into humility, and into the possibility that the world is always bigger and stranger than your best arguments can contain. The intelligence confirmation maze is seductive, comforting, even addictive, but it is also lonely and ultimately limiting. The courage to challenge yourself, to embrace not just the strength, but also the fragility of your own thinking, is the only way to keep growing. Every time you let go of the need to be right, every time you allow yourself to be surprised, you find the path out, and into a world richer, wilder, and more honest than any logic maze could ever offer. The openness overload spiral. There's a point in life where you realize the world is bigger than you ever imagined. You discover that every argument has two sides, every belief a shadow, every person a hidden backstory you never saw coming. At first, this is exhilarating, like standing atop a hill and seeing new landscapes stretch in every direction. You learn to listen, to doubt, to hold space for complexity. You become the person others trust in a debate, the friend who mediates, the one who says, "Let's look at this from another angle." Your mind opens, and the world rushes in. But what happens when the door never closes? What happens when openness, once a strength, grows so boundless that it erases the very boundaries that once gave you shape? This is the openness overload spiral. It's subtle, almost invisible at first. You think you're growing wiser, more compassionate, more intellectually humble. You let every new idea in, dismantling each certainty and rule you once held dear. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the furniture of your mind begins to shift. The walls become transparent. The door unhinges, and you wake one day in a room with no edges, just the restless echo of endless possibility. At first, it's easy to celebrate this as progress. After all, the world is full of rigid minds and stubborn dogmas. Who wants to be closed off? You read more, listen more, seek out the unfamiliar, exposing yourself to cultures and perspectives that once felt foreign or even threatening. Your opinions soften, hard edges round out. You become someone who can see value in every argument, beauty in every contradiction. But then comes the second act, decision fatigue. Suddenly, every question, what to believe, who to trust, what path to take, becomes a labyrinth. You see so many sides, so many shades of gray, that no answer feels complete. A simple choice, like voicing an opinion at dinner or deciding on a career path, balloons into a referendum on every possible worldview. Your mind, once clear, is now a hall of mirrors. Imagine someone scrolling endlessly through news articles, reading every take on a political issue, feeling obligated to weigh every perspective before forming an opinion. Or the college student, paralyzed by course selection, unable to commit because every field of study is fascinating. Every future life feels simultaneously right and wrong. Or think of a person in a relationship, empathizing so deeply with both their own needs and their partners that every conversation becomes a negotiation with infinite possibilities, none of them ever quite settled. In the openness overload spiral, boundaries start to feel like betrayals. To assert a preference feels almost violent, a denial of all the other possible truths you now see with painful clarity. Who am I, you wonder, to claim one answer when so many others are plausible? The desire to be fair, nuanced, and understanding becomes so all-consuming that you lose the ability to act, to stand, to say, "This is what I choose." Ironically, the spiral often begins with a noble motive, the rejection of arrogance, the embrace of humility. You don't want to become one of those people whose mind closed up years ago, fossilized by habit and bias. So you keep the doors open, just a little longer, just a little wider, until you forget how to close them at all. But the world has edges. Life demands commitment, choices that exclude, actions that define, lines that must sometimes be drawn. The cost of this spiral is subtle but severe. Without boundaries, your sense of self starts to erode. You become more adaptable, yes, but also more diffuse. Friends come to you for advice, but you find yourself offering 10 perspectives and no conclusions. You avoid conflict, even within yourself, afraid that any clear decision will betray someone or some part of yourself. Even your memories become foggy because every interpretation, every angle blurs into the next. You feel present everywhere and nowhere at once. For some, the openness overload takes a physical toll. Sleep becomes elusive as your mind races through arguments, options, regrets. You hesitate before every reply, mentally rehearsing every possible counter-argument. The world's noise grows louder because you've opened every window and left them all unshuttered. In time, you may start to envy those who can just say yes or no, who move through life with a simplicity that now feels alien, almost enviable. But the spiral is not just private, it's cultural. In a hyper-connected world, we're bombarded with opinions, hot takes, philosophies, and critiques at every moment. The expectation to be open, tolerant, and endlessly receptive becomes a performance, a badge of virtue. And yet, this performance comes at the price of decision. Societies, like individuals, can lose their sense of collective purpose when every value must be weighed against every other ad infinitum. Is there an escape? Not by shutting the door completely. The answer isn't to regress into dogmatism, to rebuild walls, and refuse to hear anything that challenges your comfort. Instead, it's to rediscover the art of selective openness, a commitment to boundaries, not as barriers to understanding, but as the very conditions for meaning. It's realizing that the ability to say no, to commit, to risk being wrong, is as essential to growth as the willingness to reconsider. Think of the artist who studies every style, but eventually chooses a medium and begins to create, not because other styles are worthless, but because art demands a frame. Or the leader who listens to every advisor, considers every option, but ultimately takes a stand, knowing that no decision is perfect and no action is free from contradiction. Or the friend who, after hearing every side of an argument, finally says, "Here's where I stand. This is my truth for now." These acts of boundary setting are not betrayals of openness, but its fulfillment, an openness that can breathe, that can move forward, that can grow. To reclaim your boundaries is to remember that your mind is not a thoroughfare for every passing thought, but a home you are allowed to shape. It's giving yourself permission to choose, to commit, to define, even if it means sometimes being misunderstood. It's realizing that true openness is not about living with the door off its hinges, but about inviting in what enriches you and letting go of what only leaves you scattered and uncertain. So if you find yourself lost in a room with no doors, paralyzed by the echo of infinite perspectives, remember, the ability to close the door is not a failure of compassion or intelligence. It's the first step toward reclaiming your own voice, your own life. Openness is a gift, but only when you remember that you too have a shape and a right to take up space. In that moment, you step out of the spiral and return, not to certainty, but to the living, breathing act of choosing your own way forward. The empathy-intelligence collapse. There is a profound strength in empathy, the ability to deeply understand and share the feelings of others. It connects us, builds bridges, and fosters kindness in a world often fractured by misunderstanding. Yet, beneath this noble capacity lies a hidden peril. When empathy intensifies beyond a certain threshold, when thinking deeply about others blends with feeling too much, it can lead to what might be called the empathy-intelligence collapse. This is a state where compassion, instead of nourishing the soul, drains it. transforming care into fatigue, and where understanding others starts to cost the preservation of one's own well-being. Imagine standing in a crowded room, surrounded by countless voices, each telling a story of pain, joy, struggle, or hope. An empathic mind hears them all. It doesn't merely listen, it absorbs, analyzes, and emotionally resonates. Every sorrow becomes a weight on the chest, every joy a fleeting flicker amidst overwhelming complexity. The mind races to process, to make sense, to feel alongside, but the heart grows heavy. The emotional resources deplete. This collapse is not a sign of weakness. Rather, it emerges from the very depth of intelligence and sensitivity. The sharper your perception, the more you notice subtleties, the unspoken pain behind a smile, the tension beneath calm words, the silent cries for help, hidden in everyday gestures. You map others' emotional landscapes in exquisite detail, understanding not just what they feel, but why. Yet, as the empathy deepens, it begins to erode the boundaries between self and other. Compassion fatigue sets in. The well of emotional energy dries up. You find yourself overwhelmed by the cumulative weight of others' suffering and joy alike. Your mind, once a sanctuary for understanding, becomes a battlefield of emotional overload. Empathy, once a light, now threatens to burn you out. Consider caregivers and therapists, whose professions demand constant emotional engagement. Many face this collapse. Dedicated to healing others, they often neglect their own needs until exhaustion overwhelms them. It is a tragic irony that those who give so much can be left depleted, vulnerable, and disconnected from their own selves. In everyday life, the empathy intelligence collapse can appear subtly. You might feel drained after social interactions, weighed down by the feelings you absorb but cannot release. You might struggle to maintain boundaries, feeling responsible for others' happiness or pain. Anxiety and burnout may follow, as the mind's effort to process so much emotional data becomes unsustainable. So, what can be done to navigate this delicate balance? First, recognize that empathy without boundaries is not sustainable. Preserving self is not selfish, it is essential. Strong empathy requires a resilient self, capable of absorbing pain without losing identity or well-being. Second, develop emotional self-care practices. This might include mindfulness, grounding techniques, or creative outlets that help process and release emotional buildup. Protect moments of solitude to recharge your inner resources. Third, learn to discern when to engage deeply and when to step back. Not every emotional wave needs to be ridden fully. Sometimes, compassion means holding space for others without carrying their burdens. Fourth, cultivate cognitive empathy alongside emotional empathy. Understanding others intellectually can create a buffer that lessens emotional overwhelm, allowing you to maintain clarity and perspective. Fifth, seek supportive communities or professional help when needed. Sharing emotional labor lightens the load and fosters resilience. The empathy intelligence collapse teaches us about the limits of human endurance in the face of emotional complexity. It is a warning and a guide, reminding us to balance depth of feeling with strength of self. In this intricate dance of connection, true compassion shines brightest when it nourishes both others and the self. Only then can empathy be a sustaining force, rather than a collapsing one. Remember, your capacity to care is profound, but it must be guarded with wisdom, nurtured with kindness, and balanced with the courage to protect your own heart. Because in the end, empathy is not just about feeling others, it's about sustaining the self that feels. The self-improvement doom loop. You wake up with resolve. Today you'll be better. You'll sharpen your mind, master your habits, chase wisdom wherever it hides. Maybe you listen to a podcast about neuroplasticity while brushing your teeth. Maybe you squeeze a morning workout in before your first meeting, tracking heart rate and calories on your phone. By breakfast, you're reviewing your daily affirmations, optimizing your to-do list, and scanning articles about productivity, mindset, and growth. You're not just living, you're upgrading. Each action chosen for maximum self-improvement, every minute accounted for, every weakness exposed and scheduled for elimination. At first, the results are intoxicating. Your confidence rises with every new habit. Meditation brings clarity. Journaling sharpens focus. You feel like you're finally catching up to the version of yourself you've always wanted to be. Friends notice. You feel a little superior, a little invincible. Each new insight is a notch on the belt of progress. You hunger for more. If you can become this much better in a month, imagine who you'll be in a year. But something shifts, imperceptibly at first. Each upgrade, each mental tweak brings new problems into view. The better you get at focusing, the more you notice the micro moments your mind slips. The more articulate you become, the more you cringe at small lapses in speech or logic. Every flaw, no matter how minor, suddenly stands out in sharp relief. The more sophisticated your self-awareness, the more angles you see for improvement, and the more frustrated you become when you inevitably fall short. Your inner world morphs into a whiteboard scrawled with unfinished lists, red circles around every gap in performance, every failure to live up to potential. You become the architect and the inspector, endlessly renovating the house of your mind, but never moving in. There's always another wall to knock down, another foundation to shore up. Your drive to improve, once a source of energy, curdles into obsession. Rest becomes suspect. Wasted time, a sign of laziness. Stillness breeds guilt. Joy becomes a hack, to be optimized for chemical reward rather than savored in its raw, unpredictable form. When friends ask what you do for fun, you struggle to answer because everything now feels like a means to an end. Imagine someone staring into a mirror with a magnifying glass, scanning for blemishes. The longer they look, the more flaws they find. Pores, wrinkles, spots invisible to others. The smarter you become, the more fine-grained your critical gaze. The pursuit of perfection amplifies your perception of imperfection. You become haunted by the gap between where you are and where you could be. Each day's progress only sharpens tomorrow's dissatisfaction. This doom loop can be especially punishing for high achievers, for those raised to believe that excellence is the key to love, safety, or meaning. Self-improvement is their drug, and their poison. The harder they work, the more flaws come into focus, until the act of growing becomes its own form of suffering. The horizon of enough always moves, a mirage dissolving as you approach. You find yourself unable to switch off. Even leisure activities, reading, exercise, meals, become tasks to optimize. You read not for pleasure, but to extract value. You exercise with ruthless discipline, obsessing over performance metrics. Even your relationships are assessed. Is this conversation meaningful? Am I learning? Am I showing up as my best self? Moments meant for connection or relaxation are colonized by the anxious need to become someone better. And then there are the setbacks. The inevitable days when you slip, regress, or just feel empty. You berate yourself for wasting time, for not being disciplined enough, for failing to convert every experience into growth. Instead of showing compassion, you double down. More analysis, more strategies, more relentless self-interrogation. You become both the judge and the accused, trapped in an endless trial. The irony is brutal. The more you optimize for happiness, fulfillment, or flow, the less peace you find. Tranquility becomes unattainable, not because you're not trying hard enough, but because you're trying too hard. Growth becomes your prison. Self-improvement, the path to freedom, turns into a treadmill where the finish line is always moving, and rest is forbidden. You may even envy those who seem content with just being, children at play, old friends laughing without purpose, people who live by routine or whim rather than by a grand design for self-mastery. Their ease feels alien, almost suspicious, as if they've missed some vital truth. But deep down, you crave that kind of effortless peace, the sense that you are enough, even if you never upgrade again. The doom loop is seductive because it promises control. If you can just improve enough, you tell yourself, you'll finally feel worthy or safe or loved. But the promise is a mirage, and the loop feeds on your dissatisfaction. The more you try to fill the void with achievement, the emptier you feel. You may start to wonder, who are you improving for? What are you running from? Is there a version of yourself that's already worthy of rest? Escaping the doom loop isn't about abandoning growth or resigning yourself to mediocrity. It's about remembering that you are more than your flaws, more than your metrics. Growth is healthy when it serves life, not when it replaces it. You can practice self-compassion, allowing imperfection, accepting that sometimes good enough really is good enough. You can slow down, breathe, and remember that peace is not the absence of flaws, but the presence of acceptance. Sometimes the smartest, bravest thing you can do is simply to be, to rest in the unoptimized, unpolished present, and trust that you are still whole, still valuable, just as you are. Because if you wait for the day when you've eliminated every flaw before you allow yourself peace, you will be waiting forever. The self-improvement doom loop isn't the sign of a higher calling. It's the shadow of a forgotten truth. That growth without kindness, without acceptance, is just another kind of suffering. And that sometimes the greatest improvement is learning how to let go. The analysis versus action war. There is a peculiar kind of suffering that haunts the intelligent and the cautious. A silent, daily war between analysis and action. If you're the kind of person who wants to do things right, who needs to see every angle before you leap, you already know the battleground. You felt it in the late nights spent researching, the endless scroll of strategies, the mental rehearsal of conversations and moves. You prepare so thoroughly, so diligently, that by the time you're finally ready, the world has already moved on. In this hidden war, your own intelligence becomes the enemy, whispering, "Wait, just a little longer," as opportunities quietly vanish beyond the horizon. It starts innocently enough. You have an idea, a business you want to launch, a trip you want to take, a change you want to make. The first step seems obvious. Understand everything. You dive into articles, books, podcasts. You seek out case studies, best practices, stories of those who succeeded and those who failed. The more you learn, the clearer it becomes just how much you still don't know. There are always more variables, more risks, more things that could go wrong. Analysis becomes comfort, a shield against the unknown. You tell yourself that this is wisdom, that you're being prudent, responsible. And in truth, preparation is valuable, sometimes even life-saving. But there is a tipping point, a moment when planning and strategizing stop being preparation and start becoming a prison. You begin to feel the weight of inaction, but every attempt to break free only sends you back into the arms of research. What if you miss something? What if the timing isn't perfect? What if you move too soon and regret it forever? This is the war, a battle between your mind's craving for certainty and your life's need for movement. Intelligence, that precious gift, whispers 1,000 reasons to wait. Wait until you have all the facts. Wait until you're sure. Wait until conditions improve, until you're smarter, stronger, richer, more prepared. And as you wait, the world quietly keeps spinning. Others leap, stumble, recover. Opportunities arise and evaporate while you sit at the crossroads, drawing and redrawing the map. Think of the talented writer who dreams of finishing a novel. She spends months outlining every scene, researching every detail, reading every book on craft and structure. By the time she's ready to write, her excitement is gone, replaced by anxiety and fatigue. She wonders if she should research more, wait for a better idea, or take another course. Meanwhile, others write badly, revise, and eventually improve. Not because they knew more, but because they started. Her analysis, once a tool, has become a wall. Or consider the entrepreneur who studies market trends, scrutinizes competitors, and simulates every possible outcome on a spreadsheet. He tweaks his plan, consults experts, models scenarios, but every new insight reveals a fresh layer of risk, another reason to wait. Competitors launch their products, learn from real mistakes, build real momentum. By the time he's ready to move, the market has changed. The perfect plan is still just a plan. The world has passed him by. The analysis versus action war is not just about big dreams or ambitious projects. It seeps into everyday life. Relationships, health, happiness. How many friendships die because someone waits for the perfect moment to reach out? How many apologies are never spoken because the words aren't quite right? How many days are wasted waiting for the stars to align? As if perfection were possible, as if certainty were ever guaranteed. At its heart, this war is fueled by fear. Fear of failure, fear of regret, fear of being exposed as inadequate. Analysis promises safety. If you just learn enough, you won't make mistakes. If you just wait a little longer, the path will clear. But in reality, inaction is its own risk. Life does not wait for perfect timing. The landscape changes, opportunities decay, the person you were preparing to become quietly fades into the background. Ironically, the more intelligent and self-aware you are, the more vicious this war can become. You see more variables, more nuance, more complexity. You can argue yourself into paralysis, justifying every delay as rational. You think you're being careful, but you're really building a fortress of hesitation, brick by brick, until you're trapped inside your own caution. The tragedy is that action is always a leap into uncertainty. No amount of analysis can fully prepare you for what will happen. The map can never be the territory. The plan will always collide with reality. Every step you take will reveal new challenges you couldn't have predicted from a distance. This isn't a failure of intelligence. It's the nature of life. So, how do you break the deadlock? Not by discarding analysis altogether, but by recognizing its limits. There comes a point when you must step into the unknown, armed not with certainty, but with courage. You must let go of the fantasy that you can outthink risk and accept that some things can only be learned by doing. Progress isn't made by those who know the most, but by those who move, adapt, and refuse to be paralyzed by possibility. If you find yourself trapped in the analysis versus action war, remember that wisdom lies in balance. Prepare well, but not forever. Learn enough to take a step, then take it. Even if you're unsure, even if you might fail, the world will not wait. Life rewards the willing, not the perfect. Because in the end, the greatest regret is not that you tried and failed, but that you waited and never tried at all. The clock is always ticking. The war is always there, whispering doubts and reasons to stay put. But if you listen to action, if you dare to move, you may discover that most of the things you feared were just illusions in the fog of overthinking. Sometimes, the only way forward is to stop thinking and begin. The thought becomes cage cycle. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the shape of your mind. Not the brain itself, but the web of models, diagrams, and frameworks you've built over a lifetime. Maps of meaning and prediction, each one crafted from experience, learning, logic, and sometimes sheer imagination. These models help you make sense of chaos, letting you shrink the world into something you can handle, organize, and explain. But what if one day you realize you're not just using those models, you're living inside them? This is the thought becomes cage cycle, a trap that seduces the sharpest thinkers and the most careful planners. The more you refine your understanding of reality, the easier it becomes to swap reality for the diagram itself, to inhabit the map so fully that the territory vanishes. It starts innocently. You're faced with life's complexity, relationships, careers, ambitions, fears, so you simplify. Maybe you draw mind maps, flowcharts, pro and con lists, intricate theories of how the world works. You organize your life into bullet points, habits, routines, categories. You become the architect of mental blueprints, proud of how you can step back and see the patterns. For a while, it works beautifully. Your models help you avoid mistakes, navigate social dynamics, make smarter decisions. You get feedback that you're a strategic thinker, a systems person, someone who sees the big picture. Each time, the satisfaction grows. Your model is praised, so you invest in it even more. But then, a subtle shift. The model becomes the default lens, the script for every situation. When new information appears, you don't simply update your model. You force the data to fit what you already know. That awkward conversation? That's just cognitive dissonance at work. A friend's sudden distance? A textbook attachment style problem. Your own emotions? Neurochemical patterns, nothing more. You diagnose, categorize, and map, turning every living moment into an entry in your mental system. At first, you feel clever, but eventually you start to sense a barrier, a kind of invisible wall between you and life as it's actually happening. You're observing reality, but always through a glass, always at one remove. This is the moment when the thought becomes a cage. Your models are so polished, so satisfying, so comforting in their structure, that you stop questioning whether they are even true. You trust the map more than the land beneath your feet. In conversations, you listen for which box someone fits in, rather than their raw, unpredictable humanity. In your own experiences, you look for patterns that confirm your existing categories, ignoring the rich, messy details that don't quite fit. Bit by bit, the model becomes not just a tool, but a prison. Every interaction, every decision, every feeling must pass through the filter of your diagrams, and if it can't be diagrammed, you start to doubt its value, or even its reality. This cycle is subtle, but devastating. You notice it in people who lose themselves in ideology, political, religious, or scientific. The model explains everything, so nothing new can be truly surprising. Or in the executive who lives by strategy frameworks, reducing human beings to KPIs and workflows until the spirit of collaboration vanishes. Or in the academic who is so fluent in theory that they cannot see the human heartbreak behind the data. But it also happens in smaller ways. The person who sees all relationships as games of power, the one who interprets all behavior through the lens of trauma, the analyst who thinks in nothing but cost-benefit charts. Each model is seductive because it feels so much safer than chaos. And yet, over time, the cage closes in. Life loses its color, its unpredictability, its rough edges. You become blind to what doesn't fit your theory. Your relationships flatten into roles and labels. Your sense of self becomes a summary of your own frameworks. Joy, heartbreak, wonder, all are filtered and explained, but never fully lived. At its worst, the thought becomes cage. Cycle turns you into a ghost in your own life, haunting the diagrams you drew long ago. There is a psychological law at work here. The more invested you are in your model, the harder it is to notice its failures. You start defending the model, not reality. You become more loyal to the consistency of your worldview than to the wild, contradictory evidence of your senses. This isn't just a personal flaw, it's how the human mind works. We prefer structure over uncertainty, even if that structure is false. History is littered with examples. Think of scientific revolutions, how old theories held for centuries, not because they fit reality, but because reality was forced to fit them. The geocentric model, the phlogiston theory, the four humors each explain so much and so elegantly that their adherents miss the signals pointing to something greater, stranger, and truer. Or in politics, how ideologies built on airtight models can blind entire societies to suffering, injustice, or change, because the diagram must always be right. But the cycle is not inevitable. The first step to breaking out is a kind of radical humility, a willingness to see your models not as truth, but as tools. Ask yourself, where does my model fail? Where does life break my categories, refuse my diagrams, challenge my certainty? Talk to people who don't share your frameworks. Listen to those who baffle you, whose stories don't fit. Notice the parts of your experience that make no sense in your model, and stay with the discomfort. Sometimes the most honest act is to admit you don't know what you're seeing, to let the mess of reality back in. It's not about abandoning models altogether. Without them, you'd drown in chaos. But it's about remembering that the map is not the territory. The theory is not the thing. And the diagram is never the life itself. The world is always larger, rougher, more mysterious than any cage you build for it in your mind. If you find yourself living inside your thoughts, step out, touch the ground, risk surprise, let life be stranger than you imagined. Because in the end, freedom comes not from perfecting your diagrams, but from loving the world beyond them. The thought becomes cage. Cycle can be broken, not by smashing your models, but by learning to open the door and walk back out, again and again, into the vivid, uncharted territory of the real. The insight isolation effect. There's a quiet loneliness that few people talk about. It's not the loneliness of having no friends, nor the ache of being misunderstood in love or work. It's something subtler and stranger, a feeling that begins when your mind starts to move a little faster, to leap a little further than those around you. At first, it feels like a gift. Insights come quickly. Connections spark where others see only dust. You notice patterns, ironies, blind spots. In a conversation, your brain surges ahead, mapping out the argument before it's finished. But soon you notice something odd. When you try to share these insights, the air changes. People smile politely, change the subject, or worse, look at you as if you've spoken another language. So, slowly, almost unconsciously, you begin to hold back. You share a little less each time. Your brightest thoughts stay unspoken, and you begin to vanish, intellectually, in plain sight. This is the insight isolation effect. It's the experience of having thoughts that run ahead of the crowd, of seeing 10 steps when others are still on the first, and feeling over time that your best ideas don't belong. There's no drama, no public shaming. Instead, there's a gradual erosion, a sense that if you keep revealing what you see, you'll only set yourself further apart. So, you develop a new habit. You edit yourself. You become an expert at fitting in, at measuring your words, at offering only as much as the moment can bear, and each time you pull back, your presence dims just a little, even as your mind burns more brightly than ever. It's easy to misunderstand this effect as arrogance, but that misses the point. The insight isolation effect isn't born from superiority, it's born from difference and the desire to belong. When your thoughts consistently diverge from the group, it's human nature to self-censor, to prioritize harmony over disruption, connection over candor. Maybe you've experienced this in a classroom where your answers seem to leapfrog the discussion, leaving classmates silent or confused. Or in a workplace where you spot the flaw in a plan but hesitate to voice it because the group momentum feels unstoppable. Or even at home where you sense problems or possibilities that others miss but swallow your words so as not to seem strange or aloof. Over time, this habit becomes self-reinforcing. You start to doubt the value of your insights. Maybe you're overthinking, you tell yourself. Maybe you're missing something obvious. The internal monologue grows cautious, careful. You begin to second-guess your own perceptions, and with each unspoken idea, your intellectual self retreats deeper into the background. The world sees your smile, your nods, your willingness to go along. But the part of you that's most alive, your insight, remains hidden, flickering quietly in the dark. This kind of isolation is uniquely cruel because it's invisible. No one criticizes you directly. No one asks, "Where did you go?" Instead, you vanish by inches, slipping beneath the surface of social expectation. The result is a kind of psychic exhaustion, a sense that your mind is both overfull and underused. You might pour your ideas into notebooks that no one reads, or create art, music, or code that never leaves your hard drive. You might find solace in online forums or books, searching for kindred spirits, people who not only think as fast as you do, but who also understand the cost of always having to slow down. There are subtle symptoms that reveal the insight isolation effect at work. You may feel restless in meetings or social gatherings, eager for a deeper conversation that never arrives. You may develop a private skepticism, quietly watching as the same old ideas get recycled and celebrated, wondering if it's worth the risk to shake things up. You may envy those who can share their full selves without fear, or who seem content to live in the comfortable shallows. Sometimes, the isolation grows so pronounced that you fantasize about escaping, to a place or a time where sharp minds are welcome, even cherished. But the cost of this self-erasure is immense, not just to you, but to everyone around you. When the most insightful minds hold back, entire communities lose access to the very ideas that could lift them higher. Organizations become stagnant. Friendships grow shallow. Problems go unsolved because those with the clearest vision have learned it's safer to keep silent. The insight isolation effect is a tragedy, not of pride, but of unrealized potential, a slow-burning exile of the mind. Is there a way out? The first step is to recognize what's happening, to name the pattern, and to realize you are not alone. Many of the world's greatest thinkers, artists, and innovators have written of this same feeling, the ache of being out of step, the longing for intellectual kinship. The goal isn't to force your ideas on an unreceptive audience, nor to bury your insight for the sake of false harmony. Instead, it's to seek out spaces where your thoughts are not just tolerated, but welcomed. Sometimes, that means finding a new tribe. Other times, it means leading gently, offering your insights in small doses, in ways that build trust rather than threaten belonging. It also means reclaiming your own voice, even if no one is listening. Journaling, creating, thinking deeply. These acts keep your mind alive, even in periods of isolation. And when the moment is right, having the courage to speak your truth, even at the risk of being misunderstood, can shatter the illusion of invisibility. You may be surprised to find others, once silent, who have also been waiting for permission to bring their full minds to the table. Ultimately, the insight isolation effect is a call to both self-acceptance and quiet bravery. Your pace may not match those around you, but your presence, when fully offered, can be the spark that changes everything. The world needs your insight, even if it doesn't always know how to ask for it. Don't let the fear of vanishing rob you of the joy of thinking, creating, and sharing at your highest level. In the end, it is not the acceptance of others, but the embrace of your own mind that sets you free. The cost of seeing more. To see the world through many lenses is a gift few possess, a richness of perspective that expands the mind and deepens understanding. Yet, This very breath can become a burden so heavy it fractures the foundation of certainty itself. This is the cost of seeing more. When you grasp countless viewpoints, the concept of truth begins to dissolve, replaced by a tangled web of plausible illusions, each competing fiercely for your belief and allegiance. Imagine standing in a vast gallery filled with mirrors, each reflecting a slightly different image of reality. No single reflection can claim absolute fidelity, yet each appears convincing, compelling, and coherent in its own right. You move between them, knowing that what one mirror reveals is only a partial story. Another shows a contrasting truth, equally vivid and reasonable. The more you look, the less certain you become which image represents reality. This is the paradox of intellectual openness and empathy toward diverse perspectives. It cultivates wisdom but also breeds doubt. When you understand history's layers, the multitude of cultural narratives, political ideologies, and personal truths, you see that facts are often filtered through interpretation. Every claim to truth is embedded in context, shaped by bias, and shaded by perspective. The cost of seeing more means your mind becomes a battlefield of competing narratives. Each story carries its own logic, its own evidence, and its own emotional weight. You appreciate the validity in opposing views because you see the world's complexity. But this same appreciation seeds indecision and skepticism. In relationships, this can be disorienting. You empathize with multiple sides of a conflict, recognizing the fears and hopes of each person involved. Yet, this empathetic balance can leave you feeling untethered, as if no position holds firm ground. The truth becomes slippery, refracted through the prism of countless experiences. Philosophers have wrestled with this tension for centuries. Relativism, pluralism, and constructivism all grapple with how to navigate a world where absolute truths are elusive or non-existent. The cost of seeing more is the acceptance that certainty may be an illusion, that belief is often a choice among competing, equally plausible stories. But this cost also contains profound freedom. When truth is not a fixed point but a landscape, you gain humility and curiosity. You learn to hold ideas lightly, to question assumptions, and to remain open to change. You become a seeker, not a knower, a traveler through the shifting terrain of meaning. Yet, freedom without anchors can be lonely and exhausting. The mind may spiral into relativism that paralyzes action. If all truths are illusions, what motivates commitment, choice, or conviction? How do you live authentically amid ambiguity? The answer lies not in finding a singular truth, but in embracing coherent narratives that resonate deeply with your values and experience. It requires courage to choose what to believe, knowing the choice is provisional and open to revision. It means engaging in dialogue with others, testing ideas, and refining understanding continuously. Balance is crucial. The cost of seeing more need not lead to nihilism or cynicism. Instead, it can foster a mature wisdom that appreciates complexity while still seeking meaning and purpose. It invites you to navigate the dance between certainty and doubt, belief and skepticism, illusion and insight. Ultimately, seeing more is both a blessing and a challenge. It expands your horizons, but demands resilience. It opens your mind, but calls for grounding. It dissolves simple truths, but offers richer, more nuanced understandings. In this intricate mosaic of perspectives, the quest is not for an absolute truth beyond reach, but for a thoughtful, compassionate, and courageous way to live amid competing illusions, crafting meaning not by possession, but by participation. Because when everything feels like plausible illusion, the real act of faith is to engage fully, choose wisely, and embrace the beautiful uncertainty of seeing more. The meaning disintegration pattern. You start as a seeker. Maybe you grew up surrounded by certainties, beliefs about the world, yourself, the purpose behind each moment. At first, these truths comforted you, provided scaffolding for your choices, your hopes, your sense of belonging. But one day, curiosity, or maybe pain, cracks open the foundations. You ask a simple question. How do I know this is true? The answer doesn't satisfy. So, you dig deeper, peeling back each layer of assumption, each inherited narrative, until even the bedrock feels suspect. This is the beginning of the meaning disintegration pattern. It doesn't happen all at once. You start with one idea, a belief about morality, love, success, or fate. Maybe you challenge the notion that hard work guarantees happiness, or that love is always selfless, or that life has a fixed purpose. At first, it feels liberating. To question is to awaken. You relish the feeling of shaking off illusions, breaking the spell. Each piece you disassemble makes you feel sharper, more honest, more awake. You become proud of your ability to see through things, to resist the comforting fog of dogma. But the more skillful you become at deconstructing meaning, the harder it is to stop. Each truth you unravel reveals another web of unexamined assumptions. If that isn't true, what about this? If I can't trust this story, can I trust any? The pattern deepens. Nothing is sacred. Not your dreams, not your values, not even your sense of self. You dismantle political beliefs, spiritual convictions, even your own motivations. The stories that once guided you become riddles with no solution. Soon you notice a strange emptiness. Where once there were pillars of meaning, there are only open questions. You search for new beliefs to replace the old, but each candidate crumbles under your scrutiny. You learn to spot the seams, the self-serving logic, the unacknowledged fear hiding beneath every claim of certainty. This is just another comforting story, you say, and dismiss it. Your mind is a scalpel, endlessly slicing away the illusions, but now you're cutting into bone. At times, the emptiness feels like freedom, a vast sky with no ceiling. You are unburdened by illusions. But when night falls or the world feels cold, you sense the ache beneath the surface. The comfort of meaning, even when arbitrary, was never just an illusion. It was a lifeline, a way to orient yourself, to find warmth, to belong. Now you crave it, even as your mind rebels against every attempt to believe again. You catch yourself longing for the innocence you dismantled, for the simplicity of a purpose you could simply accept. Consider the philosopher who spends decades unraveling all systems of thought, finally realizing that even skepticism can be an idol, or the scientist who proves every cherished myth false, only to find themselves yearning for wonder. The activist who sees through every social script, but struggles to find a cause that feels genuinely real. Even the everyday person who, in chasing authenticity, pulls apart every motive until all that's left is a vacuum where meaning used to be. You try to fill the void with experiences, adventure, romance, work, pleasure, but each new passion is immediately dissected. Why do I care about this? Is this really meaningful? Or am I just distracting myself? You become an expert at catching yourself in the act of believing, forever stepping outside of your own story. You're both the actor and the audience, and the play starts to seem pointless when you know it's all an act. This is not just existential dread, it's an exhaustion that seeps into every part of life. The joy of creating, the warmth of love, the thrill of discovery, each is shadowed by the relentless interrogation. Is this real? Or am I just playing along? The world loses its color, becomes a hall of mirrors reflecting only your doubt. You crave meaning, but every time you reach for it, your mind warns you it's a trick. The hunger deepens, but so does the inability to feed it. The truth is, the mind is not designed to live only in deconstruction. Just as you need shelter, you need stories, reasons to act, to care, to endure. Meaning isn't just an intellectual construct. It's a psychological nutrient. You can survive without it for a while, but over time, the absence hollows you out. The most rational, skeptical minds are still haunted by the need for something to believe in, something to love, something that matters. The pattern does not mean you're doomed to emptiness. It means you're standing at a crossroads, the place where innocence and wisdom collide. Maybe the old meanings no longer fit. Maybe you can't unsee what you've seen. But you can choose to build new meanings, not because they are absolute, but because you are human. You can allow yourself to play, to care, to create stories you know are imperfect, but which still give color and shape to life. You might discover that meaning is not found, but made, handcrafted from fragments, chosen not for their certainty, but for their resonance with your heart. You can decide that the act of caring is itself meaningful, even if you can't prove it. That the search for connection, truth, or beauty is worth pursuing, even if you know it's never complete. The meaning disintegration pattern is a rite of passage, not the end of the story, but the moment when you realize that life without meaning is unbearable, and that only you can choose which meanings you dare to live for. In the end, the mind that questions everything must still find a way to live. The meaning you crave is not a structure you outgrow. It's a shelter you build again and again out of hope, love, and the courage to begin believing, even with your eyes wide open. The measurement trap. Feedback. You begin with ambition. Maybe it's to get healthier, become more productive, or to grow your business, your art, your channel. Whatever the domain, you set a goal and, with the best of intentions, decide to measure your progress. You set up a tracker, create a spreadsheet, download an app. You pick a metric: steps walked, pages written, sales made, hours focused. The logic feels unassailable. What gets measured gets managed. With each data point, you sense momentum, a line trending upward, tangible proof that you're on the path. At first, it's motivating. But somewhere along the way, a subtle transformation occurs. The numbers you collect, meant to serve the goal, quietly take over the meaning of the goal itself. The metric becomes not just a signpost, but the very territory. What began as a tool for growth mutates into a hollow ritual of number chasing, and your original ambition withers beneath the weight of your own analytics. Imagine a runner who wants to get fit. At first, he simply enjoys running, breathing in the morning air, feeling his heart pound, losing himself in rhythm and scenery. Progress is felt, not calculated. But then, he straps on a fitness tracker. Now, every run is measured. Pace, distance, heart rate, calories burned. He starts running for the numbers, pushing for new personal bests. Eventually, if the numbers don't improve, the run feels like a failure, no matter how good it felt. The joy of the experience is replaced by the pressure of the metric. The process is inverted. The goal is no longer to enjoy running, but to see improvement on a dashboard. Or consider a writer who starts tracking words per day. The act of writing, once an act of creation, becomes a race to hit a target. At first, the numbers motivate her to sit down and write, but after a while she finds herself padding sentences, stretching ideas, focusing more on quantity than quality. The project grows in length, but not in depth. The real goal, crafting something meaningful, becomes an afterthought. Her creative satisfaction is replaced by a compulsive need to meet a number, even if what she writes feels empty. This is the measurement trap, the feedback loop, where the act of measuring progress distorts the meaning of progress. The tool for improvement becomes the obsession. The metric, once a map, becomes the destination. Instead of asking, "Am I growing?" you start asking, "Did I hit my target?" And when you inevitably miss, frustration grows, not at the lack of real development, but at the failure to reach a number. It's a trap because it's so subtle and so easily rationalized. Modern life is full of metrics: followers, likes, hours studied, dollars earned. We are surrounded by dashboards and leaderboards, by graphs that chart every aspect of our existence. We are taught that what counts can be counted, that everything important is measurable. But the moment you give the metric authority over your sense of accomplishment, you risk sacrificing the real for the measurable. Think of a company obsessed with quarterly earnings. At first, metrics like revenue and profit are vital. They track growth, diagnose problems, help make decisions. But as the pressure mounts, the company begins to optimize for the metric rather than the underlying mission. Short-term gains are pursued at the expense of long-term health. Corners are cut, products are rushed, values are diluted. Success becomes hollow because the numbers are up, but the soul of the enterprise has been traded for surface-level wins. Or take a student who starts to value grades above all else. The pursuit of learning is replaced by the pursuit of a high GPA. Instead of curiosity and mastery, there is anxiety and box ticking. The student might learn to game the system, to study only what will be tested, to avoid intellectual risk. In the end, the transcript glows, but the mind remains unchallenged, the passion unlit. The metric has devoured the meaning. Social media is perhaps the most obvious arena for the measurement trap. Creators start by wanting to express themselves, share ideas, build connections. Soon, they are obsessed with likes, shares, watch time. Every decision, what to post, when, how, is filtered through the lens of what will move the needle. Content becomes formulaic, optimized for engagement, stripped of originality. The goal was, once to connect, to inspire. Now, it's to win a numbers game. Creators burn out, audiences drift away, and all that's left is the echo of an algorithm. The measurement trap is seductive because numbers are comforting. They are concrete, legible, easy to compare. They give the illusion of control in a world that is ambiguous and uncontrollable. But meaning is not always quantifiable. The things that matter most, joy, love, fulfillment, mastery, resist easy measurement. They live in the margins, in the untracked moments, in the slow and messy process of becoming. And yet, we return again and again to the safety of metrics. We fear being lost, so we build maps of everything. We crave validation, so we let numbers judge us. But soon, the journey is forgotten. Only the mileage matters, so how do you escape this trap? Not by rejecting measurement altogether. Metrics have their place. They can motivate, illuminate, reveal patterns. The key is to remember what the numbers are for, not to dictate your purpose, but to support it. Use metrics as a tool, not a master. Set goals, but ask yourself regularly, does this number still reflect what matters? Or am I chasing it because it's easy to count, not because it's truly meaningful? If you catch yourself losing sight of your original ambition, step back. Remember why you started, before the numbers. Seek progress you can feel, not just record. Trust the quiet feedback of satisfaction, the invisible growth that happens beyond the reach of charts. Sometimes, the best things cannot be measured, only lived. The measurement trap is real, and it's everywhere. But so is your capacity to resist it. In the end, the most important progress is the kind that no spreadsheet can show. The kind that changes who you are, not just what you can count. Let the metrics serve you, not rule you. That's how you keep the goal alive, rich, and real. The hyper-focus collapse. Imagine you're working on something so intricate, so utterly absorbing, that hours pass without you even noticing. Maybe you're writing code, dissecting philosophy, painting, researching obscure medical phenomena, or solving a gnarly problem at work. The world outside fades away. Hunger and fatigue become background noise. Every fiber of your mind aligns with the subject at hand, digging deeper, connecting threads, chasing that delicious sense of discovery. In those moments, you're not just productive, you're transcending distraction, surfing the highest wave of human focus. This is the legendary state of hyper-focus. And at first, it feels like a superpower. But the hidden cost comes later, and it comes quietly. When you finally re-emerge, maybe for a meeting or a conversation, or just to spend time with friends or family, you feel different, disconnected. It's as if you left a part of yourself behind in the labyrinth of your obsession. What should be simple, listening, empathizing, following a light-hearted conversation, now feels awkward, effortful. You search for the thread, but find yourself stumbling. Someone's telling a story, and your mind automatically looks for patterns, technical details, references to your specialized knowledge. Jokes fly over your head. Emotions seem harder to read. You are present, but not quite attuned. This is the hyper-focus collapse, a paradox where the deeper your expertise grows, the harder it becomes to connect with those who live outside your tunnel of thought. Let's go deeper. The hyper-focus collapse doesn't start as a problem. Hyper-focus is widely admired in our culture. We celebrate those who can work for 12 hours straight, those who lose themselves in their craft, who push the boundaries of art, science, or business by going further than anyone else dared. There's genuine beauty in that level of immersion. Hyper-focus is what leads to breakthroughs, to masterpieces, to discoveries that move the world. The world rewards you for going deep. But depth always comes at a price. That price is subtle, and most people don't see it until they are far along. The longer you stay in your tunnel, your zone of expertise, the harder it becomes to leave it. You develop a language, a shorthand, even a worldview that is optimized for complexity and nuance. The people around you, however, are living on different frequencies. They talk in stories, in emotions, in shorthand that makes sense only if you share their context. The things that fascinate you, obscure details, complex debates, arcane theories, don't spark the same light in their eyes. When you try to share what you've discovered, you're met with blank stares, polite nods, or gentle changes of subject. You find yourself either dumbing things down or withdrawing, unsure how to bridge the gap. Over time, this disconnect can grow. You feel misunderstood, even a little lonely. You might begin to believe that only other deep divers can truly relate to you. You seek out niche communities, online forums, conferences, or tightly focused friend groups who share your obsession. Those spaces feel like home because everyone there speaks your language, gets your references, shares your intensity. But outside those circles, the sense of isolation intensifies. Small talk becomes draining. Parties feel pointless. The world feels distant and diluted. There's another cost too, and it runs deeper than mere awkwardness. The more time you spend in the tunnel, the harder it becomes to recognize the limits of your perspective. You become so skilled at seeing the fine grain, the deep logic, the nuance, that you start to undervalue what's happening on the surface, the very places where most of life and most relationships actually unfold. You may even lose the ability to explain things simply, forgetting that clarity is not the same as oversimplification. Sometimes, in chasing complexity, you lose sight of meaning itself. It's not just a personal issue, it's a societal one. Our world is increasingly specialized, and expertise is more valued than ever. But the hyper-focus collapse creates silos, both in our minds and in our communities. When doctors can't explain medicine to patients, when engineers can't relate to end users, when artists become so abstract that their work is impenetrable, we lose the bridges that hold society together. Innovation without connection is sterile. Mastery without empathy is cold. How do you escape the hyper-focus collapse? The answer isn't to abandon your tunnel of thought or to become less intense. It's to build ladders that help you climb out. Force yourself regularly to explain what you love in language that anyone can grasp, not as a performance, but as a gift. Seek out people who know nothing about your field and learn from the questions they ask. Practice presence, not just attention. Remember that intelligence is measured not only by how deep you can go, but by how gently you can return. There is a beauty in mastery, in the exquisite detail of deep knowledge. But the real magic happens at the intersection, when you can resurface and reconnect, bringing gifts from the depths back to the shore, sharing wonder, not just wisdom. The hyper-focus collapse warns us that no matter how far we travel in the mind, we remain most human when we return, and remember how to listen, laugh, and love beyond the limits of our private obsessions. So, the next time you lose yourself in the labyrinth, remember, it's not only about how deep you go, but how well you can find your way back. Because in the end, the journey is only as rich as the people you share it with, and the world outside your tunnel is waiting, not for your expertise, but for your presence, your warmth, and your willingness to be fully, vulnerably human. The purity logic glitch. It starts innocently enough, a craving for order in a world that feels hopelessly tangled. You turn to logic, that most reliable of guides, because logic is supposed to deliver you from confusion to clarity, from noise to pure crystalline structure. You picture a universe governed by clean, elegant rules, like a perfect game of chess or a machine that never stutters. You imagine that if you can just reduce every problem to its basic parts, if you can remove the emotion, the contradiction, the messiness, you'll be left with truth in its purest form. But the quest for pure logic, while seductive, conceals a paradox. The more you pursue it, the more you risk constructing systems so sterile and rigid that they break apart the moment real life, with all its unpredictability, surges in. At first, this pursuit is thrilling. The world seems suddenly manageable, as if by breaking down arguments into if-then statements, you've finally uncovered the code beneath the chaos. You start analyzing everything: conversations, relationships, politics, even your own emotions, as problems to be solved by rules and reason. Every irrational impulse gets examined under the microscope. Every messy feeling is weighed, categorized, tamed. If someone's upset, you ask, what's the logical explanation? If a choice feels conflicted, you reach for a framework, a flowchart, a binary that will resolve it. In this way, logic becomes both shield and sword, defending you from the unpredictability of others and the ambiguity inside yourself. But soon, something strange happens. The more you build your logical system, the colder it feels. Interactions that once had depth and warmth become transactions. Predictable, calculated, devoid of surprise. You find yourself explaining away grief, anger, or love as variables in an equation, forgetting that these feelings often refuse to behave. You start to notice, sometimes with discomfort, that the people around you don't seem to fit the systems you've made. Their motives are unclear, their choices messy, their words full of contradictions and silences that no logic can parse. It's frustrating. You double down, refining your systems, creating ever more intricate frameworks in an effort to account for every possible anomaly. This is the heart of the purity logic glitch. It's the moment when your elegant constructions, built for clarity, become so brittle that they snap under the weight of reality. You see this in organizations that try to automate away every human error, only to find that rigid rules breed new, unforeseen mistakes. You see it in personal relationships that break down, because one person insists on pure reason, unable to tolerate the irrational, the emotional, the unpredictable. You see it in societies that legislate every detail of human behavior, only to discover that people will always find ways to defy, subvert, or simply misunderstand the rules. There are countless examples, both large and small. Think of a company that tries to eliminate bias from hiring by creating a perfect algorithm, only to realize that the algorithm itself picks up hidden biases from the data it's fed. Or a government that enforces a set of rules so strictly that people begin to rebel, not out of malice, but because the rules ignore the messy realities of daily life. Or the individual who, in pursuit of rationality, pushes friends away, insisting that every argument must have a winner, every feeling must have a reason, until relationships grow cold, transactional, and ultimately collapse. The glitch appears in philosophy too. Pure logic can never fully explain ethics, love, or suffering. There's always something irreducible, a flicker of chaos, a trace of the irrational that can't be banished from human life. You see this in ancient debates over free will and determinism, or in the limits of artificial intelligence, where no matter how advanced the logic becomes, machines still struggle to account for the unpredictability and subtlety of human thought. But perhaps the most profound place this glitch reveals itself is inside your own mind. When you chase logic to its purest form, you begin to distrust your instincts, to second-guess every gut feeling. You may even come to view your own humanity as a problem to be solved, rather than a gift to be experienced. The world grows distant, cold, measured in units that don't quite capture the richness of being alive. And in that space, something essential is lost, a sense of wonder, connection, spontaneity. Why does this happen? Because logic, for all its power, was never meant to stand alone. It is a tool, not a replacement for the fullness of life. The paradox is that while logic is essential for understanding, for problem solving, and for building systems that work, it must always coexist with the unpredictable, the emotional, and the chaotic. Human beings are not machines, and the attempt to treat them as such, whether in yourself or others, inevitably leads to disappointment, conflict, and isolation. The challenge, then, is to find a balance, to honor logic, but also to honor the limits of what logic can hold. This means recognizing that some questions have no perfect answers, that some feelings will never fit inside a spreadsheet, that some moments must be lived rather than solved. It means accepting that people are contradictory, that relationships are full of gray areas, that your own mind will sometimes rebel against reason in favor of intuition, or even mystery. Consider the artist who uses technique and structure, but ultimately allows chaos and inspiration to guide the brush. Or the leader who consults data but listens to the instincts and feelings of a team. Or the friend who hears the logic of your argument but still cares for your pain, even when it makes no sense. These are acts of wisdom, not weakness. Reminders that to be fully human is to live at the intersection of logic and unpredictability. In the end, the purity logic glitch is not a failure of intelligence, but a misunderstanding of its purpose. The world needs your rational mind, your ability to see patterns and make sense of chaos. But it also needs your heart, your intuition, your willingness to let go of control and let life surprise you. To chase pure logic is to risk building a world so orderly that it cannot survive the disorder it was meant to tame. So, if you find yourself tightening the rules, building the walls ever higher, pause. Ask yourself, what am I trying to protect? What beauty, what connection, what uncertainty might I be shutting out? Logic is a bridge, not a fortress. Let it guide you, but don't let it become your prison. The systems you build will be stronger, richer, and more enduring when they leave room for what can't be predicted, explained, or contained. In that space, where logic meets life, you'll rediscover the warmth and wonder that pure reason alone could never offer. The identity loop reflection. Identity is often thought of as a stable core, a fixed point around which our lives revolve. Yet, for many, especially those who think deeply and reflect endlessly, identity is less a solid rock and more a shifting mosaic. The identity loop reflection reveals a profound struggle. By examining ourselves too often, by endlessly turning inward to understand who we are, we risk fracturing that very self, leaving us disoriented and unsure beneath the mirror of thought. Imagine looking into a mirror that doesn't show one clear reflection, but hundreds, each shard revealing a different version of you. One reflects your hopes and dreams, another your fears and failures, a third your roles and relationships, and yet another your private, hidden desires. The more you stare, dissect, and analyze, the more these reflections multiply, fragmenting the sense of a singular, cohesive self. This loop begins innocently enough. Self-reflection is a tool for growth and understanding. It helps us recognize patterns, motivations, and values. But when reflection turns compulsive, when every thought circles back to questioning, "Who am I?" the process can become destructive. Instead of clarity, confusion reigns. Instead of grounding, you find yourself lost in a labyrinth of selves. Psychologically, this fracturing resembles what some call identity diffusion, a state where clear boundaries between aspects of self blur and the feeling of I becomes unstable. It's not about losing yourself in a crisis, but about the mind's intense scrutiny creating cracks in the mirror, reflecting too many possibilities, too many eyes. The paradox is stark. The very act of seeking a stable identity can unravel it. The more you question, the more you discover conflicting desires, values, and narratives. You see the roles you play: child, friend, worker, lover, and the contradictions among them. You witness how culture, upbringing, and circumstance shape you, yet none define you fully. The self seems both everywhere and nowhere. This fractured identity can breed anxiety and alienation. You may feel like a stranger to yourself, doubting your feelings and choices. The mirror becomes a hall of echoes, each reflection asking a different question, none providing an answer. Yet, the identity loop reflection also invites a deeper insight. Perhaps identity is not a fixed essence, but a fluid, evolving process, a dance of multiple selves adapting to time and context. This perspective can be liberating. It frees you from the impossible demand to be one true self, and opens the possibility of embracing complexity and change. Philosophers like Heraclitus said, "You cannot step into the same river twice." Just as water flows and shifts, so does identity. Each moment reveals a new facet, a new reflection in the mirror. The challenge is to hold these fragments not as threats, but as parts of a dynamic whole. Practical ways to navigate this loop include mindfulness and acceptance. Instead of resisting or trying to fix the fractured self, you learn to observe it with compassion. You allow the multiplicity to exist without judgment, recognizing that uncertainty about self is a natural part of being human. Building connections with others can also ground identity. Relationships provide mirrors of external reality that complement internal reflection. Through empathy and shared experience, you find continuity and belonging that stabilize the shifting self. Ultimately, the identity loop reflection is a call to balance self-examination with self-compassion, to seek understanding without losing acceptance, to explore without becoming trapped. Because beneath the mirror of thought, the question, "Who am I?" is not always meant to be answered with certainty, but lived with openness, an ever-changing story written in the interplay of reflection and presence. And in that dance, you find not fracture, but freedom. The over-observation breakdown. You begin with an honest wish, to be more aware, to understand yourself better. Maybe you've read that the unexamined life is not worth living, or that self-observation is the gateway to mastery, growth, even peace. So, you pay attention. You watch your thoughts as they arise, analyze your emotions as they pass, track your habits, even monitor the way your body responds to a room or a conversation. Each observation brings a small sense of progress, a feeling that you're becoming the author of your own story, not just a passive character. At first, this is liberating. You notice how anger begins as tension in your chest before it becomes a word. You catch the subtle ways anxiety tugs at your decisions. You become your own experiment, gathering data, unraveling patterns, illuminating corners of your mind you never dared to enter. Mistakes become feedback, not failure. You pride yourself on your awareness, on your capacity to witness, adjust, and evolve. But slowly, almost invisibly, the act of observing becomes a compulsion. The watcher in your mind never rests. It's there when you wake, auditing your mood. It's there when you speak, evaluating every phrase for authenticity. Even in moments of joy, a part of you stands at the edge, monitoring, am I enjoying this the right way? How do I look while laughing? Is this real happiness or just a performance for others? You observe yourself observing until even your most natural impulses feel staged, every action weighed for meaning and consequence. This is the over-observation breakdown. Self-awareness mutates from a tool into a cage. The freedom you sought by watching yourself now binds you, making spontaneous action feel dangerous, even impossible. Each gesture is preceded by analysis. Each emotion is met with suspicion. Why do I feel this way? Is it justified? What's the root cause? The questions never end, and the stream of life slows to a trickle of over-examined moments. Imagine an athlete who studies every movement so closely that their body forgets how to run. They trip, hesitate, lose flow. Or think of a pianist who, desperate to play perfectly, starts to monitor every finger and every breath until the music dies, replaced by awkward calculation. The same happens in daily life, where once you acted with ease, now every behavior feels observed, dissected, second-guessed. You start to miss the days when you could just be, when life flowed, messy and uninspected. Social situations become battlegrounds. You replay conversations, checking your tone, your posture, the subtle meanings between words. You start to worry that people can see the analysis flickering behind your eyes. Even alone, you are never truly alone, always a spectator, never just a participant. Spontaneity vanishes. Laughter feels forced. Tears hesitate at the threshold, waiting for permission from the silent observer within. Worse, observation becomes self-judgment. Noticing isn't enough. You must correct, optimize, reframe. The mind's eye, meant to reveal truth, starts to seek faults instead. The more you see, the more you find to fix. Eventually, you long for oblivion, the ability to lose yourself in action, in feeling, in the simple pulse of being alive. You envy children who play without self-consciousness, artists who lose themselves in creation, anyone who can move through the world without the constant mirror of self-surveillance. Sometimes you try to switch it off, meditate, distract yourself, seek flow. But even these acts become monitored. Am I meditating correctly? Am I truly present? The observer is relentless, always hunting for flaws, always one step behind. You realize that you are living two lives at once, the life you're actually living, and the life you are endlessly analyzing in real time. This breakdown isn't just exhausting, it's isolating. It creates a distance from your own experience, a sense that you're watching life rather than inhabiting it. Emotions are named, not felt. Actions are assessed, not enjoyed. Relationships become transactions in self-presentation. At the root of all this is fear, the fear of making a mistake, of being inauthentic, of missing the deeper truth hidden in each moment. So, what's the way out? The answer isn't to abandon awareness, but to find balance, to allow the observer to step back, to trust the unconscious wisdom of your body, your heart, your instincts. Sometimes the truest self is the one that acts before it is analyzed. You can give yourself permission to act imperfectly, to feel deeply, to let moments unfold without a running commentary. You are not just the watcher. You are also the dancer, the singer, the dreamer, the one who lives, not just the one who sees. Awareness is a gift, but over-observation is a prison. The art of life is learning when to look and when to let go, when to reflect, and when to simply live, unobserved and fully alive. The image versus intellect trap. It's a modern paradox that lurks beneath ambition and self-awareness, hiding in classrooms, boardrooms, social feeds, and even the quiet spaces of your mind. You want to be seen as intelligent, respected, admired, a person whose thoughts matter. At first, that's healthy. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be understood, but slowly, quietly, the pressure to look smart starts to grow. You discover all the techniques, how to speak confidently, how to reference the latest research, how to drop buzzwords at just the right moment, how to ask clever questions that signal depth even when you're feeling lost. And without noticing, your focus drifts from developing real insight to managing the perception of insight. You become an expert in appearing intelligent, but the deeper well of actual understanding begins to run dry. Think of the student who learns to impress teachers. She figures out what answers they like, how to echo their language, how to write essays that sound profound, even if her grasp of the subject is shallow. She gets praise, high marks, a reputation for brilliance. But when faced with a problem that isn't on the syllabus, she freezes. The mask is perfect until the questions change. Or picture the professional in meetings, always ready with an articulate observation, a subtle reference, a carefully timed agreement with the boss. He learns the power of image, never showing uncertainty, never admitting what he doesn't know. Colleagues are impressed. He's a master at navigating status, curating his words to signal authority and intellect. But late at night, he feels the emptiness creeping in. He realizes he spent more time polishing his performance than wrestling with the raw material of actual thought. The world rewards performance. On social media, in academia, in business, the ones who appear smart often rise the fastest. The algorithms are tuned to reward confidence, not curiosity. The loudest voices set the tone. We learn, consciously or not, to optimize for optics. A well-designed profile, the right credentials, a stream of clever takes. Even our doubts are carefully packaged, vulnerability presented as strategy. Over time, you may forget where the performance ends and the person begins. This is the image versus intellect trap, a feedback loop that trains you to signal intelligence more than to seek it. It's especially dangerous for those who are naturally articulate or quick-witted because success reinforces the habit. You become skilled at hiding confusion, at spinning partial knowledge into the illusion of mastery. You may even start to believe your own press, confusing applause for understanding. The echo of your public persona drowns out the quieter voice that whispers, "You don't actually know." It happens in subtle ways. You choose books that look impressive on a shelf, but never finish them. You join conversations to be seen, not to learn. You share ideas you only half grasp, hoping no one asks the one question that reveals the cracks. You dread moments of silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because you're terrified your image will collapse. And yet, the cost of this trap is enormous. Real insight comes from sitting with not knowing, from asking questions that don't have easy answers, from admitting ignorance and wrestling with complexity. Growth requires vulnerability, a willingness to look foolish, to risk being wrong, to spend time in the shadow of uncertainty. But when all your energy goes to managing how you're seen, there's no space left for deepening your own understanding. You chase a moving target, always one clever remark ahead of exposure, but falling further and further behind your own potential. Think about the people you truly admire, the thinkers, creators, leaders whose wisdom seems genuine. They are often the ones who are unafraid to say, "I don't know," who let go of image in pursuit of substance. Their intellect is earned in the crucible of failure, confusion, and relentless curiosity. They know that appearing smart is easy. Becoming wise is a lifelong struggle. They don't hide behind polished phrases. They ask hard questions and listen for hard truths. Escaping the image versus intellect. Trap means making a radical shift. It means choosing learning over looking good. It means letting go of the need to impress and focusing instead on the slow, uncomfortable, deeply personal work of thinking, doubting, and growing. It means being honest about your gaps, admitting when you're wrong, and allowing yourself to be changed by what you discover. This isn't easy, especially in a world that rewards speed, certainty, and confidence. You may lose the applause, at least for a while. People might be surprised when you admit you don't know. But in that honesty, a deeper kind of respect grows, not just from others, but from yourself. If you catch yourself performing intelligence, stop and ask, what do I really know? What am I pretending to understand? Where am I hiding my ignorance for fear of looking weak? Let yourself be a beginner again. Spend time with the hard questions. Choose depth over display. Because in the end, it's not the image of intelligence that changes your life or the world. It's the hard-won insight that comes from doing the work no one sees, from letting go of how you appear and focusing on who you are becoming beneath the surface. The world is filled with performances. True wisdom is what remains when the audience is gone. The insight addiction. Feedback. Picture your mind as a hungry explorer, always seeking new lands, always craving the high of discovery. At first, this hunger is a gift. You devour books, podcasts, conversations, YouTube lectures, and ideas rain down on you in thrilling flashes. The feeling is unmistakable, a jolt of dopamine every time you stumble across a concept that reorganizes the world in your head. This is the electricity of insight, the aha moment, the mental spark that makes you feel alive and awake in a world of sleepwalkers. For a while, it feels like you've unlocked the cheat code to intelligence itself. Why would you ever stop? But over time, the landscape changes. Each new insight becomes a little less satisfying. You need more of them, faster, brighter, deeper. The hunt for revelation turns into something compulsive. You scroll for epiphanies late at night, watch video essays at double speed, leap from article to article, and before you know it, you're addicted not to growth, but to the sensation of learning. The novelty becomes your drug, and the quieter, more difficult skill, the slow, patient integration of wisdom into your actual life, fades into the background, lost in the noise. This is the insight addiction feedback. Let's go deeper. In the beginning, you genuinely grow. Your mind stretches to hold paradoxes, connect ideas, synthesize new truths. You learn to see through old narratives, spot hidden patterns, understand yourself and others with increasing depth. Each insight opens up more questions, and this curiosity feels holy, even noble. But soon, you start chasing novelty for its own sake. The aha moment becomes its own reward, separate from any real transformation. You feel restless unless something new is crackling in your head. Silence and repetition grow intolerable. Reflection feels like a waste of time compared to the buzz of the next idea. You might notice this in your reading habits, skimming for the big reveal instead of dwelling in the argument, or in conversations, steering toward topics you haven't explored, growing bored when someone brings up familiar ground. Even in therapy or self-reflection, you crave epiphanies, mining your own life for untold secrets, always believing the next layer will be the one that finally frees you. When you encounter something difficult or slow, a practice that demands repetition, patience, or deep integration, you recoil. The thrill isn't there. You abandon it for something new. You become an insight collector, but not a wisdom builder. The problem is, insights without integration fade quickly. They lose their power. You might remember the headline, but not the lesson. You recite dazzling ideas at dinner parties or in online debates, but your own life barely changes. You wonder why you feel stuck, why your relationships, habits, and inner world still look the same after consuming so much knowledge. It's because you've mistaken the appearance of growth for the slow, sometimes boring work of change. Like someone who only ever samples appetizers, you never settle down for the nourishing, unglamorous main course. This feedback loop is intensified by our modern world. Social media algorithms reward novelty and surface-level revelation. Self-help culture and pop philosophy trade in viral quotes, not lived transformation. Even traditional education often mistakes memorization for understanding, or quick takes for deep learning. You are trained almost from childhood to seek the high of insight and move on rather than wrestle with an idea until it settles into your bones. The more you chase the hit, the more hollow it becomes, requiring ever more novelty to get the same rush and leaving you emptier each time. Consider the painter who, inspired by every new trend, changes style with each canvas but never builds true mastery. Or the entrepreneur who pivots at the first sign of boredom, never allowing one vision to mature into greatness. Or the spiritual seeker who jumps from teacher to teacher, practice to practice, always in search of the next awakening, but never settling long enough to become whole. In every case, the search for insight becomes a barrier to wisdom. What's the way out? It begins with humility, a willingness to be bored, to repeat, to sit with discomfort and allow one insight to change you slowly. It's learning to let an idea soak into your actions, your habits, your relationships, rather than always chasing the next revelation. It's giving yourself permission to go deep, not just wide. Sometimes that means reading the same book twice, meditating on a single phrase for weeks, or returning to a painful lesson until it finally leaves the mark. It means trading the glamour of perpetual novelty for the quiet dignity of transformation. You don't have to abandon your love of insight. You just have to reclaim your capacity to integrate. True wisdom is what happens when novelty meets practice, when you allow the thrill of new ideas to ripple out into the messy, beautiful lived reality of who you are and how you move through the world. The aha moment is just the beginning. The rest is what you do with it. So, if you feel yourself trapped in the insight addiction feedback, chasing revelation after revelation, but longing for something deeper, pause. Let the next insight be the one you live, not just the one you admire. Let wisdom become a practice, not a performance. Let integration be your new superpower, because in the end, it's not the number of revelations you collect, but the ones you embody that transform your life from a series of brilliant flashes into a sustained, illuminating glow. The critique cannibalism effect. It starts as a gift, a mind tuned to spot the flaws, the gaps, the hidden assumptions others miss. You grow up praised for your sharp eye, your ability to dissect an argument, to take apart a story, to see the cracks no one else will name. You read books with a pencil in hand, underline the awkward phrasing, make mental notes of where the logic stumbles. Your critique feels like insight. You feel in control, almost invincible. At first, the world feels richer for your ability to question it, but over time, that gift starts to turn. The voice that once sharpened your intellect begins to consume it. You notice yourself questioning not just the arguments of others, but every idea that bubbles up in your own mind. Before a sentence is finished, you see 3 reasons why it won't work. Before a project is begun, you imagine how it will fail. Your critical eye, once trained on the world, swivels inward, dissecting your thoughts before they can draw breath. And slowly you find yourself paralyzed, unable to create anything at all. This is the critique cannibalism effect, a paradox where a mind so skilled at critique becomes its own worst enemy, feeding on itself until nothing new can grow. It's a spiral, a self-devouring loop, where the very faculty that should make you wiser instead makes you smaller. Every spark of inspiration is smothered by a chorus of objections. Every tentative step towards something original is pulled back by an army of inner critics, each one more ruthless than the last. The effect is subtle, insidious. You may not even notice it at first. You call it high standards, honest self-assessment, or just being realistic. But if you listen carefully, you'll hear a different story. A quiet war between creation and critique, where critique always wins because it always arrives first. You may find yourself abandoning drafts, closing notebooks, deleting files before they're finished. You may convince yourself that this is discipline, when in truth it is a defense mechanism, an armor you wear against the terror of making something imperfect. There are countless faces to this effect. The aspiring novelist who sketches out worlds but never writes chapter 1, convinced the prose will never measure up to the classics she admires. The musician who hears every possible flaw in a melody, so he never records a single song. The entrepreneur who dismisses every business idea as doomed before it leaves the drawing board. The student who polishes the introduction to an essay endlessly, never daring to move past the first paragraph. On the surface, it may seem like perfectionism, but it goes deeper than that. Perfectionism is the demand for flawlessness. Critique cannibalism is the conviction that nothing you make could ever survive your own gaze. It's the internalization of every harsh review, every withering comment, every voice that ever told you to be realistic. Your own mind becomes a hall of mirrors, reflecting back only the defects, never the potential. The danger is that this self-devouring critique feels rational. After all, who could argue with the value of rigorous thinking, of questioning assumptions, of refusing to settle for mediocrity? But left unchecked, critique ceases to be a tool and becomes a tyrant. The act of making is always messy, always uncertain, always haunted by the possibility of failure. True creativity requires a temporary suspension of disbelief, a willingness to make something bad before it gets better. But the critique cannibalism effect allows no such grace. Every experiment is shot down at the proposal stage. Every mistake is evidence of inherent weakness. Over time, the mind stops proposing at all. The costs are enormous, both private and public. Privately, you may feel a growing emptiness, a sense of wasted potential, of stories untold and ideas untried. Publicly, the world loses the inventions, the art, the contributions you could have made. Self-devouring critique is invisible from the outside, but it is everywhere. In the emails never sent, the art never shared, the solutions never voiced in meetings because you pre-rejected them all in your head. What feeds this effect? Partly it's cultural. We live in a world that rewards clever criticism, that valorizes the skeptic and the debunker. Social media trains us to deliver quick, cutting takes. Academia teaches us to interrogate every premise. Over time, the muscles of critique grow strong, but the muscles of creation, of risk, of boldness, of saying maybe, atrophy from neglect. There's also a personal dimension. If you've ever been shamed for a naive idea or seen your early work mocked, you may learn that safety lies in preemptive self-doubt. But the tragedy is not just in what's lost. It's in how unnecessary the loss truly is. Creation and critique are meant to be partners, not enemies. Every artist, every thinker, every innovator must eventually invite their inner critic to the table, but only after something has been made. The timing is everything. To create, you must first give yourself permission to be imperfect, to be vulnerable, to try and to fail. Only then does critique serve its real purpose, not to destroy, but to refine, to shape, to help you see what you could not have seen before. Is there a way out? The first step is noticing the spiral. Listen for the moment when critique appears before creation, when the reasons not to try drown out the small voice that wants to begin. Practice protecting that voice. Give it space, even if only for a few minutes, to make something unpolished, unfiltered, raw. Share your work with people who understand that feedback is for growth, not for shame. Learn to thank your critic, but never let it write the first draft. Remember that every masterpiece began as a mess, every innovation as a risk. The critic has a role to play, but the creator must be allowed to go first. Only then can your mind feed itself, not on what it tears down, but on what it builds, slowly, courageously, and imperfectly. Creation is an act of rebellion against the tyranny of endless critique. Let the world see what you can make, not just what you can tear apart. The debate identity trap. There is a subtle and insidious snare that can entangle even the sharpest minds. The debate identity trap. It begins innocently enough. You argue your point with clarity, passion, and skill. You win again and again, earning respect and affirmation. Yet, over time, the victory becomes less about uncovering truth and more about claiming the final word. Disagreement becomes a familiar territory where your identity settles, not as a seeker of understanding, but as a champion of being right. Imagine entering a room where every conversation is a contest, a battle of wits where the scoreboard is silent but ever present in your mind. Each argument is a chance to prove yourself, to assert dominance, to hold the floor. The thrill of victory is addictive, the rush of persuading others, the satisfaction of outthinking opposition. But with each win, the space for genuine dialogue shrinks. The debate identity trap transforms disagreement into a home, a place where the ego feels secure amid conflict. Your sense of self becomes intertwined with winning, with the assurance that your perspective prevails. Truth, once a guiding light, fades into the background, eclipsed by the desire to be the last one standing. This trap distorts communication. Conversations no longer seek common ground or mutual insight. Instead, they become arenas where the goal is to dismantle the other's argument, to expose flaws, to dominate intellectually. The joy of shared discovery is replaced by tension, defensiveness, and division. Over time, this pattern breeds isolation. Friends and colleagues may tire of constant debate, feeling unheard or dismissed. Relationships strain under the weight of competition, masquerading as conversation. You may notice a growing sense of loneliness, paradoxically born from your intellectual victories. Psychologically, the trap feeds on identity needs, validation, control, and certainty. Winning debates becomes a way to affirm worth, to silence doubt, and to maintain a stable self-image. But this stability is fragile, dependent on external affirmation rather than internal truth. Escaping the debate identity trap requires profound self-awareness. The first step is to recognize when winning has eclipsed understanding. Ask yourself, am I engaging to learn or just to prevail? Am I open to being wrong, or am I defending a position at all costs? Developing humility is crucial. True strength lies not in victory, but in vulnerability. The willingness to listen deeply, to admit uncertainty, and to embrace the complexity of truth. Practice curiosity in conversations rather than conquest. Cultivating empathy also softens the competitive edge. See others not as opponents to defeat, but as fellow travelers with valuable perspectives. This shifts the dynamic from conflict to collaboration. Finally, reframe dialogue as a shared journey rather than a battleground. Celebrate moments of agreement, acknowledge valid points from others, and value growth over glory. The debate identity. Trap warns us of the dangers when the ego commandeers conversation and truth is sacrificed on the altar of winning. Yet, it also offers a path toward richer connection and deeper insight, where identity is not tethered to triumph, but rooted in openness. Because in the end, the most meaningful victories are not those won in argument, but those won in understanding and shared humanity.